Hello, romance lovers. Today's story is called I Became the Wife of a Monstrous Crown Prince. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss out on more exciting stories. The main character, soaking wet to the skin, feels only hellish cold. She lies on the ground and cannot move, hearing someone's strange voice. In front of her, she sees a boy with white hair, who is so shocked by her condition that tears are running down his cheeks one after another. Despite the fact that the girl does not understand at all what is happening to her, she admires the eyes of the young man who is leaning over her. A drop of the touched boy fell on the cheek of the unfortunate woman, causing her to close her eyes. The lady does not understand why he is crying. Feeling tired, the heroine closed her eyes, thinking at the last moment how warm she was. Suddenly, she comes to her senses and opens her eyes. But she is no longer on the street, but in a clean and cozy room. The victim rises from the bed and clutches her head, and at that moment, the servants pounce on her with questions about whether she has woken up. The maids called the girl, calling her their highness, but the protagonist herself does not understand why they call her that, or whether they are addressing her at all. The little girl wanted to look back, but her gaze fell on the mirror, where, to her surprise, she saw herself with a not quite usual appearance. The lady has absolutely no idea why she looks like this, what happened to her, and where she is. After some time, when the servant gave the mistress some medicine, she closed her eyes because it was too bitter for her. But the subordinate explained that she needed to eat well in order to recover faster. Chewing the nasty pills, the girl thinks that she has been in this palace for several days already and has been taking this medicine for each of them. After talking to the people there, she realized that she was in the world of the novel The Beast and the Young Lady, which, by the way, is intended for adults. This work is a romantic fantasy about a fairy tale beauty and the beast Prince Blake, who was cursed. The story also tells of Richard, a wild man who desperately fought for the love of Diana, the main character of the novel. The injured girl ended up in the body of Lady Ansia, Diana's half-sister. Ansia married Crown Prince Blake as a child and became Crown Princess. But she was very shocked when she saw her fiancé's face, which he had been hiding under a mask all this time. When the wedding day came, she jumped into the lake, trying to commit suicide. The incident left Blake deeply shaken, who considered himself a monster, and closed his heart to everyone. After being rejected by Diana, the darkness gradually consumed him. Lying on the bed, the heroine thinks that according to the novel, when Ansia decides to drown herself, her fiancé will try to save her. But the girl understands that since she ended up in her body, it means she managed to survive. The little girl began to reason that the boy she saw recently before losing consciousness was Mr. Blake. She guesses that if he hated her, he wouldn't have cried so much and worried about her. But suddenly, the girl realized that she had been lying on the bed for 5 whole days and was so tired of doing it that she couldn't even feel her legs. The lady remembered that the bride had committed suicide after seeing Blake's face and saying that it frightened her very much, and it would be strange if the boy did not worry about it. He was probably having a hard time right now. Ansia decided to get off the bed. The surprised maid asked her mistress where she was going, to which she replied that she wanted to see the crown prince. The servant warned the little girl that the master was very shocked by what had happened to her, so she needed to be careful if she was going to see him. But she suddenly smiled sweetly and said that everything was fine, after which she asked her subordinate to take her to her fiancé. The maid immediately began to fulfill the crown princess's request. She escorted the child along the long corridor of the palace, which led to Blake's chambers. The young lady, meanwhile, began to think that she was not going to leave her husband. In fact, this character in the novel was her favorite, and Diana chose Richard, thereby destroying her interest in the story. But the girl understands that now she can change this boy's dark childhood, and she will not miss such a wonderful chance under any circumstances. The heroine recalls that besides that, Ansia in the novel had nowhere to go. She was the daughter of Count Balazian from his first wife, and her mother died in childbirth. Later, the Count found himself a new wife, who gave birth to his second child, Diana. And then the first daughter became only a hindrance for the man and his wife. He, knowing that the crown prince was cursed and would not live long, gave Ansia to him as a wife. And she herself decided to die, not only because of the appearance of her chosen one, despair and betrayal of the family weighed on her. The main character understands that in any case, even if she leaves here, she will have nowhere to go. Finding herself in front of the young master's door, where the maid had brought her, the girl decided that she had no desire to leave Blake in despair. She calmly entered the room, greeted him, and introduced herself to His Highness. But then the lady saw something unusual. Her husband, sitting on the bed with his back to her and throwing a blanket over himself, anxiously ordered her not to approach him. When Ansia wanted to say something, her husband again insistently ordered her to move away, explaining that he was a freak and that she would be very surprised when she saw him. Noticing how the young man was trembling with fear, the protagonist realized that he did not hate her, but was simply afraid that she would feel disgusted towards him. The lady sighed wearily, then moved closer to her fiancé and grabbed the edge of the blanket with her hand. Suddenly, she rips the cloth off the insecure boy, which leaves him in great shock. The white-haired crown prince with red eyes and a mask on one half of his face was so surprised by this that he could not find any words to describe his shock. Still, he buried his face in the pillow and asked his wife, offended, what she was doing there anyway. Not wanting to show his face, he angrily shouted at the girl that she had, in fact, taken his blanket without his permission. Antia smiled sheepishly because she was stunned by the fact that the main character of a novel for adults was mumbling so inappropriately. The protagonist has no idea where that gloomy Blake went, because the boy she sees in front of her looks more like an innocent Snow White rabbit. But the lady understands that they still need to resolve this misunderstanding, so she tells her husband that she needs to tell him something important. Suddenly, she sat down on the crown prince's bed and confidently tore the mask off his face. The gentleman was very taken aback by such suddenness. He turned his head away in embarrassment when his wife reached out to him with her palms, asking him not to look at him. But she did not obey his requests, and, placing her hands on his cheeks, said that she considered him very handsome. Blake's face instantly flushed, but he was no longer as worried as before. He asked the girl in surprise what she had said. The lady confessed to the crown prince that she had never seen a man as handsome as him. After that, she smiled tenderly, which meant that her words were truly sincere. The girl removed her hands from the gentleman's face, who was still completely bewildered. The main character thought that her husband probably wasn't very comfortable with this curse on his face, but still it didn't look as bad as he thought. Antia thinks he is handsome. The left side of his body is covered in black marks, he has big red eyes, and even though he is a guy, he has a beautiful nose, lips, and chin. The crown princess looked at every feature of the boy's appearance with admiration. She remembers that his curse will be lifted when he meets Diana. Blake's cheeks turned red when his wife told him that his face could be described as the most beautiful in the world, even in its current state. But the young man turned away in embarrassment and said that she, in fact, hated him. In response to this, the lady suddenly said that she did not hate him at all, as he thought. She decided to confess to him that she had not tried to commit suicide at all, but had accidentally fallen into the lake. But unfortunately, what the girl was saying was a lie. Ansia really did plan suicide. But now that the heroine is in her body, she will pass it off as an accident, because she herself would not have done so. The young ruler looked at the protagonist in surprise and asked if she really wasn't angry with him. The lady replied that yes. She said that she had heard that he had saved her when she was drowning, so she wanted to express her gratitude to him. Blake was even more surprised when the lady said this. He asked her again, puzzled. She repeated that he saved her life, and she, of course, was very grateful to him for that. The young gentleman's reaction was very unpredictable. The crown prince burst into tears like a 1-year-old child. Wiping away his streaming tears, he says in a trembling voice that he thought she was trying to commit suicide. Antia chuckled cheerfully and asked why she had to do that, since she had married such a wonderful man like him. Still rubbing his eyes, the child said that he had saved her. But after that, he thought that she would not like it and would hate him because of it. The main character guessed that this is exactly what he was thinking about all these 5 days while she was unconscious. She hugged her husband and said that this was not the case and that she really liked him, so he did not need to worry about it. Hugging the heroine back, Blake shyly said that he liked her too. The protagonist smiled imperceptibly and thought what a liar he was, because according to the plot of the novel, he liked her younger sister Diana. Without letting go of the groom, the lady thinks about how in the novel the emperor knew that Blake liked Diana and asked the count to marry them. Of course, the count sent an invitation from Ansia and a refusal from Diana. The girl smiled and sighed because it turned out that the boy had lied for the good. Suddenly, letting go of the crown prince, she asked him if they could sleep together tonight. He, blushing like a tomato, abruptly moved away from his wife, even opening his mouth in surprise. The heroine is stunned because she doesn't understand what she said wrong. The lady has no idea why he reacts like that, if he is the main character of the novel. Countess Balazian has light magic, and Diana has inherited it. She will be able to lift the curse from the crown prince. Ansia is also a member of the Balazian family, and she should have inherited this ability too, even if she didn't excel in magic. Blake's curse is not limited to just one mark. It grows throughout his entire body, causing endless pain, accompanied by a coldness in his body. The protagonist suggests that with this problem, it must have been hard for him to jump into the already cold water of the lake after her. The lady thinks that on the other hand, he never told her how hard it was for him or that he was sick. She understands that he hates himself so much. The girl is aware that physical contact is required to use the Balasian family's light magic. Then Ansia smiled slyly and thought that this novel was rated 19 plus, which meant that something more could be done than just touching. Blake blushed shyly and told his wife that they couldn't sleep together at such a young age, so they would just hold hands. The heroine was surprised at how much she embarrassed him. The young lady explained that everything was fine, because they were already married, and for them sleeping together was normal, and there was no need to be afraid of it. But the boy, burying his face in the pillow, admitted that he was very shy. Ansia was very surprised at where her wild Blake from the original had gone, because the one here looks more like a cute red-eyed rabbit. Looking at her embarrassed husband, she thought about how this 10-year-old rabbit could turn into an animal like the wolf he was in history. The little girl assumed that growing up was full of all sorts of secrets and mysteries. But in any case, she couldn't just leave it like that. The crown princess snatched the pillow from her husband's hands and then insistently asked him to come closer. Taking his hands, she declared that they were now a couple, and from now on they should sleep together every day. The young man became even more shy. She, seeing his reaction, asked if everything was okay, to which the gentleman replied that if she was not against it, then neither was he. Blake asked if she would change her mind, to which the main character said no, because she really liked him. These words so discouraged the boy that he blushed even more, so much so that it seemed like steam was coming out of him. Crossing her fingers with her husband's, the young lady asked him how he felt, whether he was comfortable or pleased. She asks him about this in order to find out if he feels the effects of her light magic on his fingertips. The crown prince hesitated to answer, as he was still too uncomfortable with her touch. Mrs. Balasian continued to hold his hands, thinking that since everything was happening like in the novel, she wanted to help Blake live a happy life. But she was not sure that he would notice her strength. In the end, the girl decided that she was simply obsessed with this novel. She wanted to help the young gentleman who would remain in torment for the rest of his life. She rose from the bed and let go of the silent boy's hands, believing that she would not succeed. But he suddenly grabbed her by the shoulders and buried his face in her back, making it clear in this way that he did not want her to leave. Blake admitted in a trembling voice that her fingers were very warm, after which he asked her not to leave him. The princess was taken aback that such a small thing should make him so upset. She said that she was not really going anywhere. Mrs. Balasian explained that she was only taking his blanket, which left him slightly confused and puzzled. The kid, burning with shame that he had created a problem for himself and even hugged the girl, silently moved away from his wife. She looked at him in bewilderment and wondered what he had imagined when he hugged her. She, with the same amount of positivity, asked her husband if he liked sleeping with her. The young man replied that it was not about that at all, but about whether she was against it, and whether she was not disgusted by sleeping with such a monster as him. The main character was very outraged that the gentleman dared to call himself that. She said that he shouldn't talk about himself that way, and he wasn't a monster. The boy seemed to feel a little better from her support, but he continued to sit in a constrained position because he was still not sure about it. The lady, seizing Blake by the hands, repeated that there was no doubt that he was beautiful, and not at all like a monster. The girl added that, besides, his curse would soon wear off, leaving no trace behind. She explained to her husband that as soon as he turned 18, the curse on his skin would lift and he would live a happy life. The protagonist asks the crown prince not to give up and not to pay attention to the words of others. The young gentleman lowered his head thoughtfully. He was interested in his beloved's words. The Balasian family passes on their light magic, while the imperial family is a curse. Philip, the founder of the empire, had a relationship with the goddess of light. The goddess gave him her powers, but he used them to found his empire. Soon the emperor betrayed his beloved and found himself another woman. Upon learning this, the goddess was beside herself with rage and sent a curse on Philip. It covers the body of any heir with black patterns that will remain on the skin forever, until death. All cursed children of the ruler die before reaching adulthood. The heroine thought that on the night Blake turned 18, he would plunge into the very depths of the abyss. But when he met Diana, the curse would lift. Ansia, taking her husband by the hands, assured him, swearing on her life, that the curse would not be with him forever. He suddenly leaned back from the girl and exclaimed that she couldn't say such things, because even if he died, she still had to live her life. The crown princess, touching his palms again, repeated that neither she nor he would die, so he did not need to worry about it. The boy was so touched by her words that he could not hold back the tears that rolled down his cheeks. The young lady, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, jokingly says that her husband, it turns out, is a crybaby. But he, still sobbing, declares that this is not so. She continued to insist that he was a crybaby, and the young heir continued to deny it, not even noticing that he was starting to cry even more. Antia patted her husband on the back and finally agreed with him, asking him to calm down. Saying that everything was fine, the crown princess laid the sleepy Blake on the bed so that he could finally fall asleep. Several hours passed, and the protagonist, who had also slept for some time, woke up and opened her eyes. In front of her, she saw the crown prince, who was still in her dreams. Madame thought he was very cute, then realized that they had been holding hands all night. The lady wanted to stroke her rabbit on the head, but this immediately woke him up. Blake smiled sweetly when he saw Ansia. She was surprised and asked why he was laughing, to which the young man replied that she liked her. The girl was stunned by this, and His Highness, smiling even brighter, thanked her for supporting him. The little girl blushed and was embarrassed to answer him, but she thought that she wanted to make him laugh and be happy more. The main character stayed with Blake for several days, and while with him, noticed that he never left his room. But only in extreme cases. Whether it's banal reading of books or eating, he does everything in his room. And when they ate together every day, the girl noticed one strange detail. And today, at another lunch, she noticed it too. For breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they are served only salads, consisting only of vegetables. Antia is already seriously wondering whether her husband is really a rabbit. Raising a spoonful of the foul-smelling broth to her lips, she noticed that the dishes were the same every day. The soup they had brought had already been served yesterday. The lady decided to ask the gentleman what he liked about food, and he, after thinking for a bit, said that he liked everything. Then the princess asked him if he liked fish and meat, and the boy happily replied that he did. The protagonist realized that her husband was not a fan of just vegetables. She assumed that he was fed only greens every day because he was cursed, because that was the only reason she could think of. Ansia decided that it was very rude to treat him like that, and apparently the servants thought it was okay, since she and Blake were still too young to cross them. The girl also recalls that responsibility for the crown prince's palace lies with the eldest son of the Hamel family. His Highness, noticing that his wife had stopped eating and was deep in thought about something, asked if everything was all right and if she liked her dish. She laughed as if nothing had happened, and then said that everything was fine. Thinking that she didn't want Blake to worry now, the main character called the maid who was standing quietly near the door. Hearing that the lady wanted to tell her something, Melissa bowed her head and prepared to listen to her. The princess asked her to call the head butler to her after their meal because she wanted to check something. The subordinate bowed and obeyed the lady, saying that she would fulfill her request. After this, the protagonist turned to her husband and offered him to try some fried mushrooms, but he stated that he did not like them. However, the girl said that he needed at least some variety in his food, besides vegetables. She managed to persuade the boy, and he decided to try a piece of fried mushroom. Feeling this pleasant taste, the crown prince smiled and clenched his fists, and the girl reminded him to chew his food more thoroughly and not to swallow it all at once. But the young man still swallowed the piece, smiling sweetly because he really liked the mushroom. The young gentleman, touching his wife's hand, said that it was warm and that he felt better when he held it. The main character was already happy in her thoughts because it seemed he felt her warm magic, but she showed her husband a modest reaction, where she said smilingly that she was glad to hear it. Then the girl asked him to quickly finish eating and go to bed. Looking at her hand, Ansia wondered if Blake felt better when he touched it, and if that meant there were grains of light in it. Sometime later, when the crown princess was informed that the chief butler had arrived, she ordered him to be admitted into the room. A thin, elderly man entered the hall, the eldest son of the Hummel family, who asked Her Highness what had happened. The heroine, sitting on the throne, thinks that he never visited her when she was sick, and even if he becomes the head of a noble family in the future, he should not forget that she is still his princess. She asked the man if he thought His Majesty's diet was too meager. He adjusted his glasses and seemed disappointed when he heard why she had called him to her, because he said he thought something urgent had happened. The lady asked whether this meant that the condition of the heir to the empire was not at all an urgent matter for him, as he said. Mr. Hummel started talking about how Ansia had only recently arrived at the palace and didn't know much yet. The funds allocated to Blake were too small. The gentleman asked the girl in an impudent tone what she will order them to do if the emperor himself does not provide enough funds for his heir. The protagonist noticed that the head butler swallows saliva when he lies, so she dares to assume something. Thinking that money might not be enough for luxury, but it shouldn't be so little that meat was not included in the diet, she answered with a simple, "I see." The man, when he heard such a slight agreement from the lady, admitted that he thought she was too young to understand him, but it seems that he was wrong. But suddenly, Her Highness announced that she was dismissing him. The butler was so shocked by her verdict that he shuddered and barely managed to stay on his feet. Gritting his teeth in anger, he asked the little girl to repeat what she had said. Turning to the guard standing nearby, the lady ordered him to put Mr. Hummel in prison for embezzling the Crown Prince's funds and refusing to confess to his crime. The subordinate had already approached the man, but the latter suddenly furiously asked the princess if she even knew the meaning of the words she was saying. The young lady replied that she knew very well and added that she even knew where he spent other people's money. The impudent man was even more enraged by her expressions. He shouted at the lady that she immediately imagined herself to be in charge when she married the damned prince. She shook her head and said that he especially shouldn't have insulted His Majesty, so he should be immediately put in prison. The subordinate bowed before the crown princess and said that her order would be carried out. The subordinate led the impudent butler out of the hall, although he continued to loudly complain. As soon as the head butler was put behind bars, all the other servants in the palace were frightened, and the atmosphere around them became very tense. But instead of resolving the situation, the main character decided to fire many people, for which she even made a whole list. In fact, when Blake was chosen as the second in line to the throne, many of the servants betrayed him and sided with Richard, the protagonist in the original story. Antia understands that there should be no traitors near her husband, however. After looking more closely at the names on the list, she threw the papers away, declaring that all workers must leave her palace. After some time, due to the fact that the girl kicked out everyone who betrayed her husband in the novel, the castle became very deserted and quiet. Then a maid approached the lady and politely reminded her that all the servants were chosen by the emperor himself, and then asked if this was a good idea. Looking at the girl's face, the protagonist noticed that Melissa was worried about something. Smiling kindly, the young lady said that everything was fine and she shouldn't worry so much. She agreed with her, then asked what His Highness preferred for lunch. The little girl suddenly remembered that they had no cooks left at all, since she had fired them all. Suddenly, she asked Melissa not to worry about such trifles, and declared that she would now speak for him. The maid was very surprised by this, so she asked the girl if she had gone crazy, but she answered that she had and asked what was wrong with that. With a beaming smile on her face, Antia confessed to the servant that when she was exploring the palace, she found something very interesting and wanted to show it to her. Arriving at some door, the heroine immediately began to open it, and the servant could not come to his senses from the fact that Her Highness herself brought her here. Meanwhile, the princess managed to open the doors, behind which was what she wanted to show. There, among all the food, were 2 jugs. Melissa was surprised at first, but then asked the lady what they were. The child opened the lid of the container and asked her to take a closer look and figure it out. Inside was some kind of red substance that was appetizing in appearance and smell. With a wide smile, Ansia said it was soy sauce and red pepper paste. The girl was surprised, but she asked the little girl in bewilderment what kind of dishes these were. She replied that these were common products from distant lands, but when added to food, they made the taste richer and more intense. Melissa exclaimed in admiration that Her Highness was indeed very smart, then asked how she knew all this. The heroine scratched her cheek in embarrassment and said that she had read a lot of books about Eastern culture when she was little. But in fact, she was lying, and this knowledge remained with her from her past life in Asia. Looking at the spices, the servant admits that she heard that many products were bought from different countries, but she did not think that they would be stored like this. The protagonist thought furiously that this was the whole point. She couldn't believe that the cooks had stored all this stuff in such a state. But suddenly, cheerfully rolling up her sleeves to quickly start cooking, she thought about where to start. Antia, despite being a princess, took on the task of preparing a dinner of oriental spices, and surprisingly, she did very well. The maid, seeing her mistress's natural talent for cooking and thinking that she was certainly a culinary genius, covered her mouth with her hand in delight. But the girl just laughed modestly because she had such skills thanks to years of cooking at home. The talented cook suggested setting the table for His Majesty as soon as possible. She prepared aromatic soup, meat, and white rice for him. The boy, seeing this, expressed his admiration but asked what kind of dishes these were. His wife informed him that this was food from the Eastern countries. Smiling broadly, Ansia added that she had looked them up in a recipe book, and since she had the necessary ingredients in the kitchen, she decided to cook them. The young gentleman asked if it meant that she had prepared dinner for him herself, to which she replied that it was so. Blake was shocked, But then, with the same imperturbable face, he asked his wife how to eat these delicacies correctly. The heroine thought that it seemed like he was seeing such food for the first time. The lady asked him if he was familiar with Eastern cuisine, but then admitted that she herself had only recently learned about it. While stabbing the fried meat with her fork, Ansia explained to the young man that these were meatballs, the minced meat of which had been brought from a good country. The princess said that these meatballs were very tasty, and she cooked them especially for him. He, hearing the last, said that it was very embarrassing, but the main character said that there was nothing to be embarrassed about. After which, putting a little rice on the cutlet, she extended the spoon to the gentleman's mouth so that he could try it. Blake was very delighted with the dish. He cheerfully exclaimed that it was very tasty. The little girl liked the compliments and asked her husband to try some more soybean paste stew, but this time she wouldn't feed it to him herself. She warned that it had a rather specific taste, so if he didn't like it, there was no need to force himself to continue eating it. The crown princess wondered whether her husband would like this dish because even though she had prepared it according to the recipe, the taste of this stew was still an acquired taste. But the young gentleman suddenly declared that he liked the taste very much. And what's more, the Oriental stew was the best he had ever eaten. Antia laughed and said that in that case she would cook for him more often. Then she thought that she seemed to be happier as a child than as his wife. But even so, she was very happy now. Looking at the joyful Blake, the lady thought that if he wanted to get rid of the curse, he would have to fall in love with Diana. This doesn't upset her because if her husband is happy, she will simply always be there for him. The protagonist thinks that she needs to do everything before he comes of age. She knows that she will protect her husband until he meets Diana. In total, there will be 3 misfortunes in her husband's childhood. The first is that he inherited a curse. The second is that Ansia tried to commit suicide on the very first day of their marriage. And the last thing that awaits Blake is the death of his father, Emperor Tensthion. After that, Richard's father, the crown prince's uncle, will become the new ruler. He will take the throne from his cursed and helpless nephew and send him to a cold southern island where he will have a difficult childhood. Continuing to eat her dinner calmly, the girl thinks that the heir who inherited the curse will experience all these torments before he gets rid of it. Thoughtfully touching the cutlery, the lady remembered that her husband's father had not yet died, which meant there was still time and she would be able to help him. She also remembered that after their wedding, the emperor left the prince's palace, and then all that was left was to wait for his return. After some time, while walking on the street, the girl realizes that His Highness really liked the Oriental cuisine, although she would not say that the food she prepared was very tasty. However, remembering how the boy ate the dishes with pleasure, she admits that he clearly liked the food. Antia clenched her fists and decided that next time she would have to make even better food. But for that, she would need a brazier. It can be made in the time in which the main character lives. If you draw a sketch of it and show it to the blacksmith, he will easily make it. The lady liked this idea, so she hurried outside to find a suitable blacksmith. But suddenly, a certain detail made her stop. She sat down near the fence and began to examine a certain place, wanting to change something in it. However, suddenly a man in expensive black shoes appeared behind the little girl and asked her what she was doing there. Antia was so frightened by his unexpected appearance that she turned around abruptly and screamed. In front of her, she saw a cute boy with black hair and red eyes. He extended his hand to her and apologized for scaring her so much. She stared at the new man in amazement, not saying a word due to shock. The protagonist, looking at the guy's black, thick eyebrows, his sharp chin, the scar on his neck, and his beast-like red eyes, realized that in front of her was Richard, the main character of the novel. The young man smiled at his friend and cheerfully told her that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The girl remembers that he is the second son of the emperor's brother, Count Castle. Since the first son, Blake, was born cursed, he was chosen as the heir. Richard himself has no right to the throne as his mother was a slave. But, consumed by a thirst for power, he will kill all his enemies and become emperor. The lady knows that at the end of the novel, he will use Diana to free Blake from the curse. She has decided that she will not allow the emperor to die and her husband to be exiled. The heroine calmly asked the arriving guest why he had approached her. The young man said that since her marriage, there had been too much noise in the palace, and he had heard that she had fired almost all of her staff. Antia assumed that he had decided to come and check the situation himself, since his spy was among her subordinates whom she had fired. The little girl asked what was wrong with that, but Richard said she had never acted so recklessly before. The lady asked him again, puzzled. He explained that the Marquis of Hamel and his family were personally chosen by the emperor, and she simply took him into custody without any further ado. The gentleman added that His Majesty personally chose all the servants, and no one gave her the right to fire them so easily. The main character clenched her jaw in anger. She was irritated by the fact that Richard knew that all the servants were his spies, but nevertheless he pointed it out to her. But the next moment she indifferently asked him if he often kept people around him whom he did not trust at all. The boy, smiling strangely, asked if she had tried to show generosity when talking to her subordinates, because by firing them she would not gain their trust, because neither she nor they trusted each other. The protagonist frowned and said that it was impolite to poke one's nose into other people's business. She told the gentleman that it was none of his business and that he should leave. But Richard, suddenly folding his arms across his chest and tilting his head to the side in bewilderment, asked his friend if she was offended by him. She did not understand his words, and the heir asked again whether she was offended at him for refusing her then. While the lady was in complete confusion, the young man reminded her that she was in love with him. He apologized for refusing her. The boy says he is the child of a slave, but asks his friend if she wants him to disobey the emperor's orders and accept her. Antia smiled, but inside she was burning with anger, because she couldn't bear to listen to how this turkey was talking to the girl who had fallen in love with him. But the guy's next words infuriated the heroine even more. He asked with a smile if she knew how he felt, because she liked him. Suppressing her inner rage, the princess calmly asked the heir if he was disappointed that no one loved him. The girl's sudden question confused him, and the little girl continued to insist that he was terrible as a person. She angrily asked how he could say such things to the crown princess, and whether he was trying to insult the imperial family in this way. Richard, wanting to touch his friend's hand, reached out to her, asking her why she was so angry. But suddenly Blake appeared and grabbed his hand, causing the girl to even scream. The white-haired boy with a menacing expression told his brother that his wife didn't like him. He said with embarrassment that he must have misunderstood something, since Lady Balazian and he were just acquaintances. But the young man maliciously hinted to him to shut up. Blake told Richard that Ansia was no longer a lady, but was now the crown princess. The imperial heir, lowering his head, asked his brother for forgiveness and admitted that he had accidentally misspoke. Blake asked him to watch his language, and if he ever showed disrespect towards the princess again, he would not get away with it. Then the boy, boldly throwing down the hand of the future ruler, ordered him to leave his sight. Richard had no choice but to leave the crown prince's palace, clenching his fists in irritation and gritting his teeth. The main character's husband, seeing how his wife was mysteriously looking at the back of the departing young man, touched her hand and asked her to look away from him. When the girl asked him what was the matter, he once again pitifully asked her not to look at other men. The lady smiled, took his hand, and said that she had not intended to do so. She added that compared to other boys, Richard was like a dog. Ansia flared up with rage and began to talk about how that scoundrel had completely lost his fear, since he said that she was supposedly in love with him. The crown prince decided to ask if she really didn't like him, since Richard was a very famous person. She became even more angry and said that she didn't even like his manner of speech, and that he was generally disgusting to her, and she didn't trust him. But the princess calmed down and told her husband with a smile that she liked cute rabbits like him. The boy was so touched by this that he began to rub his cheek against his wife's palm, giggling happily. The main character liked it because her anger instantly went away and she felt better. Suddenly, the protagonist asked Blake what kind of girls he liked, and he immediately replied that he liked Antia, but the lady said that she meant his type. However, the young gentleman again replied that he liked girls like her, after which he threw himself into her arms. The crown princess, smiling and blushing slightly, told her husband that she also loved only him. Some time passes, and the young lady, having filled the bath, lowered her hand into the water. Having made sure that the temperature was acceptable, she decided that it was time to carry out what she had planned. Opening the curtain, the girl turned to Blake, who was reading a book at the time. The young man happily asked what she wanted to tell him. Suddenly, Ansia announced that, starting today, she would wash it. He shuddered on the spot and broke out in a cold sweat, asking his wife what she had just said. Still, turning away in embarrassment, he mumbled that he would go wash himself a little later. But the main character, grabbing her husband by the shoulders, insistently asked him to go to the bathroom. The crown prince suddenly screamed and asked in horror what would happen if she too were to become infected with his curse. Ansia assured him that she would not be infected, but he said that then bad luck would follow her forever. If someone sees or touches Blake's curse, the goddess of light either bestows it upon that person or curses them with eternal misfortune. Because of these false rumors, His Highness cannot leave the palace and will be exiled to a southern island. Under the pretext of a curse, he will be removed from his position as crown prince and sent there, but thanks to the efforts of the former emperor, he will live in the palace there. The girl said that these were false rumors, but the gentleman stated that it was not yet clear whether they were false, to which the lady objected that she had already touched his skin. This did not calm the young man down, and he said that she touched him, but only a little, and not all over his body. The little girl wanted to take her husband's hand and calm him down, but he abruptly pulled his hand away and irritably shouted that he was simply disgusting. The unfortunate heir fell to the floor, covering his face with his hand, saying that if she saw his skin, she would hate him. The heroine, looking at the crying prince, thinks that the rumors are just excuses for him, and in fact, he just doesn't want to show her his body. Not understanding what she had done wrong, Ansia asked her husband to look up at her, which he did, albeit reluctantly. The protagonist, squatting down next to the boy, told him that, as she had said before, for her, he was not a monster at all. Gently touching his cheek, she added that she was not at all disgusted by him, and touching him would not make her life worse. The girl confessed to Blake that she had been happy since the moment she married him. The crown prince, his cheeks flushing, asked in surprise if she was truly happy. She smiled and replied that yes, and she was infinitely glad that he became her husband. The young gentleman felt much better. He said that he was also glad that he had married her. After that, the main character and her husband embraced warmly. Without letting go of her beloved, Ansia asked him to stop calling himself a monster and lowering his self-esteem, to which he agreed. Then the lady asked him to go to the bathroom since he had already calmed down, but the boy suddenly turned red again. The princess asked him what had happened and why he had suddenly become silent, since everything would be fine with her. The heir, looking away in embarrassment, admitted that he was embarrassed to do this. She reacted as if it was some trifle that only made her laugh. She said it was very sweet, but the prince asked her to stop. Mrs. Balazian, covering her smile with her hand, admitted that he simply looked very cute and was not joking, and the youth asked irritably why she was laughing. Suddenly, the heroine asked why he was embarrassed with her now, if he behaved normally with the servants, to which the boy replied that she was not them. The young lady then asked him if he was against her, to which he said that he was not. The princess smiled and, taking the boy by the hands, said that in that case she would ask him to go with her to the bathroom. The young heir did not resist and agreed to undergo bath procedures. Finding himself in the bathroom and preparing to take off his top layer of clothing, the crown prince suddenly turned to his wife and insistently asked her not to be surprised. She frowned and said that he had promised her that he would stop saying such things. The gentleman wanted to object again, but the girl said that if he said something like that again, she would definitely get angry, and it would be better for him to stop. Suddenly, His Highness, as if worried about something, asked his wife not to leave him. The heroine was so surprised that she fell silent. The protagonist recalls that in the novel, before Blake grows up, Ansia leaves him because only Diana can free him from the curse. Looking at the upset heir, she also remembers that her role, according to the original, is to care for him and guard him. But she does not know when the moment she is thinking about will come. Then the little boy asked his beloved why she had suddenly become silent. With tears streaming down his cheek, the boy pitifully asked his wife if she wanted to leave him. She immediately replied that no, and did not know why she should leave her husband, who was so surprisingly similar to a white rabbit. But at the same time, she clenched her fist, because everything she had told His Highness was a lie that she had to tell for his own good. The youth, still crying, asked if this was true, to which the lady, wiping away his tears, replied that it was, because now her home was here. Then the girl suggested that the young gentleman go to the bathroom before he changed his mind. Blake walked towards his wife and began to take off his shirt, under which his dark patterns on his skin were already visible. When he completely exposed his torso, the protagonist was able to see the effects of the curse, where the entire left side of his body was covered in black lines. A few hours ago, Richard, in his office, was thinking about the fact that there was not a single spy left next to the crown prince. Ansia had fired them all. Count Cassel and his half-brother are furious. They don't like that some 10-year-old girl has caused them so much trouble. Even the maid who prepared the master's bath got it too. However, the crown emperor realizes that he has one trump card left. The crown princess, Blake's wife. The young gentleman remembers that this lady liked him. Every time this poor girl would steal a glance at him, trying to hide her feelings. It was easy for Richard to seduce her. He thinks that if he makes Ansia his puppet, it will be more useful than all his spies. The prince frowned slyly and decided that he would immediately go to the crown prince's palace for this purpose, after which he ordered the servants to prepare the carriage. But when he arrived, the heroine suddenly sternly asked him to behave respectfully, because she was the crown princess, and telling her such things was rude. At that moment, Richard, who expected to see a fool head over heels in love with him, was very surprised and realized that his plan had completely failed. But what struck him even more was that the crown prince himself had also changed, for he had never been so rude. Now, sipping tea at his office desk, the heir to the throne realizes that something went wrong, because this monster was supposed to shock his wife with his body. The teacup reflected the sinister smile of a young man who decided that he now wanted to take possession of Ansia. When Blake appeared in front of the main character without his outerwear, the girl understood that she didn't need to show it now so as not to upset him. The crown prince, seeing that his wife had suddenly fallen silent while looking at him, reached out his hand to her. But the young lady got ahead of him, taking his hand first to show her support. She told her husband that he was very thin, then suggested that he go to the bathroom. Otherwise, he would catch a cold at this rate. He agreed with her. While the young gentleman sat in the warm water, his wife washed his body with a white washcloth. The little girl thought about the fact that the marks from the curse covered half of His Highness's body, but he was only 8 years old. She remembers hearing that when the marks spread across the skin, they cause excruciating pain. She has no idea what Blake must endure. With these thoughts, Ansia touched her fingers to the cursed skin. But the young gentleman, blushing slightly, asked her to stop doing this because she might get infected with it. She replied irritably that this would not happen, and warned that if he spoke of such nonsense again, she would definitely get angry. Continuing to bathe, the protagonist began to sing a song about how she had healing hands and her husband had developed a bulging belly. But Blake didn't like it, and, blushing with anger, he turned to the surprised girl and said that he didn't have any belly. The lady continued to insist that his belly was sticking out, but he sheepishly said that it was all because he had eaten a lot today. The princess said that his tummy was cute, but the young gentleman turned away from her and said that in that case he would not eat anything at all. The heroine objected that in that case he would remain so small, to which the boy said in fear that this was not very good. Ansia smiled and, patting her husband on the head, said that he had no belly and she was just joking. She asks him to continue eating. Blake was delighted and promised that he would eat well and a lot so that he would grow quickly. The crown princess also grinned and wished her husband to grow up healthy, to which he agreed and stated that he would soon be taller than her. After some time, the main character learns that she received a gift from Richard, to which he also included a letter of apology. After opening the envelope, the girl found out that he really did apologize to her for what happened recently. Ansia has no idea what this young man is doing, but she assumes that she looks useful to him, and he is trying to seduce her and then force her to spy on the crown prince. The lady doesn't know what to do because she politely refused, but the prince seems to have completely gone mad. Still, she asked the servant to send the gift back. The maid understood her mistress's order, but asked whether it would not be better to simply not reject Richard's letter. She waved her hand and asked her not to worry about it, and to send the letter back too, because the young heir was not so stupid and would understand everything. The subordinate nodded meekly and said that she would carry out her order as she wanted. The young princess fell silent, mentally hoping that the crown emperor would understand her and stop trying to give her gifts. But the next day, something completely different happened than she wanted. The servant reported that this time Sir Richard had also sent her a gift. The next day, the same thing happened. The prince again sent the crown princess a gift along with a letter and several red roses. On the third day, no changes. Today, the boy also sent her a large box with a gift, but this time the lady also ordered to send it back. On the fourth day, a servant named Hans bowed before Ansia and wanted to tell her again that Richard had sent her another gift. But the girl said that he didn't need to tell her about it every time, but simply sent back everything that the prince didn't send. He agreed with the lady's decision, but decided to say that this time the gentleman had sent an unusual thing, but a very valuable treasure. It turns out to be a very elegant, small jewelry box with a stunning ring inside made from a mermaid's breath stone. The main character is in complete shock. She remembers that in the novel, everyone praised this ring for its beauty, but the little girl wants to know what Richard has planned. Mermaid's breath is a mana stone that has concentrated the power of the sea itself. There is no greater treasure in the world. In the original story, the heir to the throne gave it to Diana. The crown princess has no idea why the young master suddenly decided to give this jewel to her, and whether he really wants to make her his spy. She told the servant that she didn't need it, and even if Richard gave her a whole mine of mana stones, she wouldn't accept it. Then Ansia resolutely asked Hans to tell her boyfriend not to send her anything else. The next day, the heroine, walking along the city streets, tells her subordinates, Melissa and Edon, to quickly catch up with her, because they are almost there. The girl and the guard could barely keep up with the lady, so the former asked her not to hurry so much. but she seemed not to hear them as she walked so quickly because she was very worried. Because for the first time in a long time, she went somewhere outside the palace. Soon the guard, the maid, and the crown princess approached a large two-story building. The protagonist is all in anticipation, so much so that her eyes sparkled, because she will soon finally have a cauldron for cooking on the fire. Having shown the blacksmith her drawing of a saucepan, the girl asked him if he could make something similar to it. The man thought for a moment and then tried very hard to do it, because there was nothing he couldn't do. Ansia was very happy about this, and she told the master that she was counting on him very much, and he added that he would never let her down. After talking with the blacksmith, the young lady and her subordinates went back outside. Melissa asked the princess with a smile if she wanted to go anywhere else, but she replied that no, and decided that they would now return to the palace. The trio immediately started walking towards the carriage, and the girl thought that she needed to go back, because Blake was waiting for her. She would have been embarrassed to say this out loud. The baby arrived at her palace in the evening when the sky turned bright orange. She was just walking along the corridors of the house when she suddenly heard someone nearby calling out to her cheerfully. A moment later, Blake, who was very happy to see her, ran into her arms. He greeted his wife and asked if she had a good walk. She, with a slight blush on her cheeks, replied that yes, and she had been very happy. His Majesty then asked her if nothing had happened to her, to which the young lady replied that everything had gone well. Ansia asked him if he was worried about her, and the boy said he was, because she came later than she promised. The main character smiled sweetly and thought that she was still glad that she had returned from her walk to the palace so early. The girl carefully removed her husband's mask and suggested that he walk around without it for a bit, as it would be much better for him. He, a little embarrassed, agreed with her, but told Ansi that she was always trying to remove the mask from his face. The protagonist fell silent and was stunned by the fact that the main character of a novel for adults was saying such ambiguous things. She smiled and, gently touching her beloved's cheek, replied that it was because she liked to see her husband's happy face. The young gentleman was delighted and said that he was also glad to see her happy. The princess asked him not to wear a mask while he was near her, to which the boy cheerfully agreed. The main character thought that it seemed like Blake missed her more than usual. Based on this, the young lady decided to ask him what had happened while she was away. At first, he answered that nothing, but then he admitted that he was scared when she was not there. But he was not worried, because he knows that she will not leave him. While the young man was holding his wife's hand, the latter noticed that his palms were shaking very badly. The girl told His Highness that he should not worry about this and that she would not leave him. He immediately became happy and asked if it was true. She replied that yes, but if he ever fell in love with another, he only had to say so, and she would immediately disappear, making room for his new love. The crown prince's joy instantly evaporated. He asked his wife seriously what she meant. The boy hears very sad words from Ansia. She says that their marriage is political, and this is what was decided for them, and not what they themselves wanted. Continuing to hold her husband's hands, the girl added that when he grows up, he will meet his true love, and will probably forget about her. But the young gentleman sternly declared that he needed no one else but her. The princess objected that when he grew up and got rid of the curse, he would be very handsome, and many girls would want to meet him. But the young man again said that she was the most beautiful for him. Ansia laughed and suggested that he would change his mind in the future when he got older. But now he was saying that because he was too young. Suddenly, Blake, with the same serious face and voice, repeated that she was the only one who was his wife, and he would always be her husband. The young man, his face flushed, looked away and said that he didn't need another, after which he asked the heroine if she wanted another husband. She smiled and said no, thinking that Diana was the only one who could free him from the curse, and even though her words were lies, they were for the good. Unexpectedly, the crown prince approached the protagonist and hugged her tenderly. Burying his face in the girl's shoulder, he asked her to be by his side until death separated them, apologizing for acting like a selfish person. Ansia blushed and burst into tears, and wiping her eyes with her hand, in a trembling voice told her husband that he would not die, and she would not allow this to happen. The gentleman began to wipe the princess's tears. She asked him to stop doing this, as he might stain his sleeve, but he said that everything was fine. Suddenly, a servant entered the palace and informed the gentleman that His Majesty the Emperor had arrived to see them. The young lady was surprised and at the same time mentally happy about this, as she had been waiting for this for a long time. Blake's father, Tenstheon, the most powerful emperor in the history of the state, came to visit them. When the crown prince asked the servant how his father was doing, he said that he was fine, and that he had closed the door of darkness without any injuries on his part. The boy, putting his mask back on, said that he expected this from him because he was very strong. An awkward silence fell between the princess, the young man, and the servant, and the main character wondered whether her husband would go to greet his father. The next moment, the servant suddenly informs the girl that the blacksmith from whom she recently placed an order has arrived. She was delighted by this and told her husband that she would be away for a short while. The young man smiled sweetly and nodded, urging her to be careful. After this, the main character left the room and hurried to the emperor, to whom she goes accompanied by a butler. Suddenly, the man starts talking about how he actually lied to her about the blacksmith. And in fact, he didn't come to see her. But the girl, who instantly guessed everything, asked if this meant that the emperor himself wanted to see her, to which the subordinate replied that yes. The heroine continued walking, thinking that she had guessed that the Lord of the Lands would want to talk to her when he arrived. The little girl understands that the words about the blacksmith were just an excuse, and in fact, Tenstheon does not want to see Blake. She is surprised at how thoughtful everything is. A drop of sweat rolled down the servant's face, and he confessed to the lady that His Majesty was very angry, and because she had fired too many servants. The lady secretly hoped that he was pretending to be angry. The man asked Ansia to say that she was wrong when the emperor asked her about it, and he would say that the servants forced her to do dirty work. The princess wondered if Hans was ready to take responsibility, since he would be killed immediately. And in the novel, he had already sacrificed himself for Blake. The protagonist decided to tell him not to sacrifice himself, because if he died, there would be no one to support the crown prince. He opened his mouth in surprise and, staring at the girl, wanted to say something, but was too astonished to utter a word. Ansia smirked and asked him not to worry and just trust her. The butler bowed nevertheless and said that he would do everything as she wanted. Philip, the man who founded the Empire of Light, betrayed his goddess. For this act, she sent a curse on his descendants. The crown princess believes that the imperial family is hiding the truth in order to protect their honor, and they condemn the one who is the successor of the curse. The goddess of light loves the empire, so she casts evil magic on the offspring of the tyrant with a fallen soul so that everyone knows about it. Rumors were spread that the heir to the curse could spread his affliction to others, so he was sent to a southern island and left there until he died alone. When the evil eye appeared on Blake's skin as a child, he was immediately removed from his inheritance and had to be sent to a remote, cold island. But Tenstheon ordered him to be sent to the alienated palace, and since his son would die anyway, he decided not to bother himself with exile and simply left him there. In fact, the emperor loves and protects his child, pretending to be indifferent. Finding herself in front of the doors of the hall where the ruler is, Ansia thought that the emperor loves Blake, and the prince needs his father's love. She is a little nervous, but understands that she needs to greet Tenstheon first and then start a dialogue between the two of them. The crown princess's fragile foot stepped onto the threshold of the hall when the butler told the gentleman that his son's bride had arrived. The little girl greeted the great ruler of the Empire of Light, who sat majestically on the throne that towered in the center of the hall. Looking at the man's face, the girl blushed embarrassedly and lowered her head, wondering why this handsome man wasn't the main character in a novel for adults. Tenstheon told Ansia that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and then admitted that he had heard that she had put the head butler in prison. He asked why. She replied that she had punished him for squandering the budget allocated for the crown prince's palace. Suddenly, the man who was next to the emperor proclaimed that his son had always been loyal to the empire, and the princess accused him and imprisoned him for no reason. The main character was surprised by this and asked if he really thought it was unfair if the evidence was already obvious. She handed His Majesty a certain document and asked him to look at it. Tenstheon, having carefully read the text on the paper, told his daughter-in-law that she had tried well. The father of the dismissed butler was very outraged by this. He declared that it was a conspiracy and his son would never betray his state. But Ansia countered that her husband was being served spinach soup, while the chief butler was eating steak prepared by the imperial chef. The lady explained that there could be no talk of any justice since the palace employee was embezzling the crown prince's money, which is considered a crime. The father of the dismissed butler was so angry with the young lady that the veins on his forehead stood out. He furiously ordered her to watch her language. But the next second, the emperor, with frightening calm and coldness, asked the man if he wanted to die. Cold sweat immediately poured down Uncle's face. He excitedly asked the gentleman why he asked such a question. The ruler, with the same composure, ordered the man to choose the right words when he spoke to his daughter-in-law. The dismayed gentleman told His Majesty in a trembling voice that he had misunderstood everything, and that the princess had been the first to insult his family. However, Tenstheon, suddenly presenting the blade of the sword to the man's throat, sternly asked him where he had put his dirty little hands. The gentleman, frowning menacingly, asked if he was going to hit the crown prince's wife. He began to frantically deny everything, but the king, pressing harder on the mister's neck, asked how he dared to lie to him. The main character closed her eyes and turned away because she didn't like seeing this picture. But suddenly a servant of the emperor appeared next to her, who told the girl that she should return. The lady was so frightened of him that she shuddered, but immediately answered that she would do so. As the butler bowed to the lady, she remembered that this man's name was Colin, and based on what he was like in the novel, she could trust him. The little girl took a mysterious small blue ball out of her pocket and handed it to the servant. When a surprised Colin asked what it was, she replied that the ball contained a recording of Hummel's son insulting His Highness and her. The subordinate said he was amazed that she had prepared even this, to which she replied that she could not accuse the Marquis without evidence. Colin bowed his head to Her Highness with a smile and said that he would convey this to the Emperor. Marquis Hummel later had his hand cut off for attempting to harm the Crown Princess in front of His Majesty, and his son had his tongue pulled out for illegally owning imperial property and insulting the princess. They were both sentenced to 30 years in prison, and the Marquis's long-standing family lost its title forever in one day. No one stood up for the prisoners because they had crossed the line. Hummel tried to hit the prince's wife in front of the emperor, and his son insulted her. The main character reflects on the fact that at this time the emperor is finishing his business. She wonders if he will call her to him for a conversation, and also guesses that he will continue to ignore Blake. The girl believes that Tenstheon was also thinking about how to get rid of Marquis Hummel, and now that he had dealt with him, she thought that he would call her. Suddenly, Ansia jumped up from her chair, deciding that things would not go this way, and that she would visit His Majesty herself. Turning to her maid, the lady asked her to prepare a carriage for her, as she was going to the palace of Filion. She first told the princess that if she wanted to meet the emperor, she should probably request an audience first. The girl, throwing a cloak over herself, replied that if she did so, she would be refused, so she would better come to the palace herself. The servant obeyed. After some time, the main character was ready to get into the carriage and go to the city, but one sudden thing made her stop. Blake ran up to her from behind and touched her hand. He asked his wife where she was going. The lady smiled sheepishly and said that she urgently needed to go to the square for a short while. However, the boy calmly said that she was lying, after which he asked if she was really going to meet the emperor. In response to this, the protagonist only smiled sweetly and said that she would return soon. His Highness resolutely suggested that his wife go with him, arguing that he would protect her. At first she was surprised by this, but then she smiled softly and agreed with his desire. The young man also smiled and blushed, saying that he was very glad that they would go together. Looking at the face of her beloved husband, the heroine thought about the fact that His Majesty loves his son, but as the head of state he cannot call him to him because of the curse. The carriage with the crown prince and his wife left, and the girl also thought that if her son himself came to Tenstheon, the latter would not throw him out the door. Soon the newlyweds arrived at Filion Castle, the dark foundation of which looked very majestic and slightly ominous. Approaching the door of the master's choir, Ansia thought that since he had already finished his business, it would be better for them to go straight to his restroom. But one of the guards who guarded the entrance angrily reached out his hand to the girl and said that if she had not asked for an audience in advance, she would not be allowed in. At that very moment, the main character, maintaining her heroic calm, asked the man how he dared to touch the princess so brazenly. The guard immediately lowered his hand and fell silent, as if he had swallowed his tongue. Taking advantage of her uncle's confusion, the protagonist squeezed her husband's hand tighter and cheerfully told him that they were moving on. Ansia, not sensing anything strange, burst into Emperor Tenstheon's room. This was her big mistake. In front of her, she saw the head of state with a bare torso, covered only by a towel. It looked like he had just gotten out of the shower. His hair was damp and drops of water were running down his body. The young lady stood dumbfounded on the spot and blushed like a ripe cherry, unable to utter a word. The man, continuing to stand there calmly, asked the children who had come what had happened. Ansia's thoughts are occupied with something completely different at this time. She admires the emperor's abs, having completely forgotten that she is in a novel for adults. Tenstheon, tucking his damp hair back, asked the children again what had happened to them. The princess immediately ordered herself to pull herself together because she needed to gain his trust, and in her opinion, the best thing to do was a compliment. The lady had no time to think, so she immediately carried out her plan and expressed her admiration for the master's beautiful body. There was such an awkward, deathly silence between the emperor and the protagonist that the latter almost sank into the ground. A moment later, the princess realized what she had done. Her entire face turned scarlet, and she frantically began to justify herself. The gentleman remained silent, and Ansia, thinking that at this rate she would be locked up in prison, apologized and admitted that she had simply seen a man's body for the first time. Blake, who had also stripped to the waist in front of her a few days earlier, asked the girl in shock what kind of nonsense she was talking about. The heroine, looking up in disappointment, realized that her attempt to handle the situation normally had completely failed. Here, Tension decides to say a few words. Throwing on a robe, he declared that today was not very appropriate to talk. The crown princess, seeing how the man had tightened his belt, finally decided that she definitely would not live any longer. While the girl was trying to recover from her shame, the emperor cast a fleeting glance at his son. The boy also did not look at anything else except him, as if wanting to get at least some attention from a loved one. But the only thing he got from his dad was how coldly he turned away from him. Turning his back to the children, Tension said that he would call them for a talk a little later. Ansia sheepishly told His Highness that they would leave his chambers immediately. And Blake, dejected and sad, said that he was leaving. After a short time, the crown princess and her husband arrived at their home palace. The main character, walking down the corridor with the prince, looked at his face and thought that he looked very depressed. She thought about how obvious it was, since he had just met his father, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, but he had immediately sent him home. The girl decided to ask the sad young man with a smile if he felt tired. He thoughtfully replied that yes, and admitted that he wanted to rest a little. After these words, the boy let go of his wife's hand, and getting ready to retire to the room to rest, he asked the guard who was standing nearby to go with him. The young gentleman went into a secluded office without saying a single word to his beloved beforehand. Ansia accompanied His Highness with a worried look until the very end. The guard, before going for the air, noticed the sadness on the lady's face and asked her not to worry so much, to which she agreed. When the subordinate found himself in the same room with Blake, he wanted to clarify what assignment he wanted to give him. Then the crown prince, sternly approaching the boy, ordered him to take off his shirt. He was very confused, but without asking any unnecessary questions, he said that he understood the order. When Eden fulfilled Blake's request, the child's eyes sparkled with interest and admiration. The youth looked closely at the strong body of the guard, who was slightly embarrassed by this. Finally, the boy asked his subordinate what he needed to do to achieve a body like his, to which he laughed and asked the master if he wanted the same toned body for himself. Blake's memory flashes back to the moment when a blushing Ansia excitedly apologized to the emperor for seeing his naked torso. The crown prince realizes that she was shocked to see a muscular man, but he is also a man, but he did not observe such a reaction in his direction. The boy sighed and told Eden that he wanted to have muscles like him, but his belly was sticking out, to which he, putting on his shirt, said that everything was fine. The young gentleman was very pleased by this, and, inspired with hope, he asked if this was true. The guy added that he had a cute baby belly, but these words, unfortunately, brought Blake's sadness back and did not help him in any way. Meanwhile, the emperor, while working in his luxurious, lonely, quiet office, picked up a certain paper. After carefully reading the entry in the document, the man immediately thought of Ansia for some reason. The main character helps her husband dry his wet hair after he took a bath. She wanted to ask him something, but he only silently turned his head away from her. But the girl is in no hurry to back down. She tells Blake with a smile that he needs to look at her. He agreed with her, then turned around, removing the towel from his head and covering his stomach area with it. At that moment, Ansia remembered that while he was bathing, he covered his stomach with his hands, so she thought that something must have happened to him. The princess decided to please her husband by saying that her kamasat would be ready tomorrow, and then she would be able to cook a lot of delicious food. But he sadly said that he did not want it, and in general, he does not eat anymore. The boy admitted that he doesn't even have muscles like a real man, so he's going to train. It dawned on the protagonist that Blake was acting so strangely because he was starting to worry about what she said about the emperor. She consoled the child by saying that he was a real man, but the prince, plopping down on the bed, declared that he would train, because he also wanted abs. The lady first told His Highness that he might catch a cold, but then tried to calm him down, saying that she liked him and that he needed to eat. Then the girl wanted to tell her husband that he had a cute baby tummy, but he immediately said, offended, that he didn't have any baby tummy. The heroine was stunned by how he guessed that this was exactly what she was going to say, but then she began to frantically think about how to cheer him up. She couldn't think of anything better to do than start playing some kind of game where she threw her whole body at Blake, screaming that she was attacking him. The princess began to tickle the young gentleman, who laughed loudly because of this. But then he asked her to stop, and the girl obeyed him. Ansia takes advantage of the moment and hugs her husband. She tells him that she likes him very much and values his health, so he needs to eat well. When she said that if he ate well, he would one day grow taller than her, the crown prince smiled and said that he would do so then. The young lady thought that her husband was very cute when he smiled, and if he was so happy, then his soul felt better. At this time, a young man with black hair and purple eyes named Yunhan came to the emperor, who was sitting on his throne. Mr. Tenstheon asked his subordinate if his son and Ansia had returned home safely. He reported that yes, and that at home, after taking a bath, they fell asleep together. His Majesty reflected that Blake had changed greatly since he had last seen him. His previously empty eyes were now sparkling. The man felt as if he had cast off his old image along with his hunched body. And in front of him, he stood straight and held his wife's hand tightly. In the opinion of the ruler, Colin's report on the princess was full of praise, without coldness and nitpicking. The emperor decided to ask his spy what he himself thought of the crown princess, whether she could be trusted, and to tell him what he had seen while he was absent for a whole month to close the door of darkness. The boy calmly but thoughtfully answered the master that yes, and this girl was a good person. By order of the emperor, Yunnan secretly observed the life of the crown prince for a month. He kept an eye on the servants who were oppressing him. He also made sure to provide treatment to the boy if the curse's effects suddenly increased when the king used the power of light. But the stalker admits in his thoughts that at some point he forgot about his goal and watched only Ansia. The guy thinks that she is a wonderful person. Yunnan realized that he envied the prince, because if he had such a bright soul as that girl next to him, his life would change for the better. The emperor remains as unperturbed as before, but he tells the youth that he did not expect him to say that. He raised his head in surprise and asked the gentleman if this bothered him. The ruler said no, and he thought that on the contrary it was good, because he hadn't seen Yunnan smile for a long time. The next day, the main character presents her husband, Eden, and the maid with new dishes, a large metal kamasot. Blake's face was filled with a bright smile and a cute blush. He said it was the first time he'd seen anything like that, and the guard agreed. The maid was surprised aloud at how much the princess knew about the culture of the East, and the boy said that she was very smart. The prince supported them, saying that his wife was a real genius. Ansia was so embarrassed by so many compliments that she blushed prettily. She was pleased to hear this, but still she thought she was not that brilliant. She rolled up her sleeves cheerfully and declared that she was about to cook an excellent dish and was relying on the help of others. But Melissa excitedly asked how that was. The girl said that it was okay because she would be helped. But at that moment, Blake raised his hand and said that he would help her too. The protagonist was very pleased with this, and, filled with happiness, she agreed with him. But suddenly, the emperor's messengers appeared behind the people, including Colin. He politely greeted those present. When the princess turned to the man in bewilderment, he greeted her as well. When the prince asked what had happened, the servant said that he had come there on the orders of His Majesty to invite the two of them to visit him. The main character was very surprised when the servant said this, so she asked if the king was inviting her too. He replied that this was indeed the case, after which he handed the young lady an envelope. Ansia noticed that the envelope had the imperial family crest on it, but she began to wonder why Tenstheon had invited her if she had made a mistake yesterday. Colin also said that the Lord had sent them gifts, so he suggested that they go to the palace quickly. The crown princess, watching the servants bring more and more gifts, asked if there had been some mistake, since there were so many treats. But the emperor's servant, putting on fashionable glasses, said that no, and all these boxes were gifts from Tenstheon for Blake and his wife. Antia decided she didn't believe it, since the gentleman had no reason to send her gifts. She assumed he was simply in a better mood after she complimented him on the beauty of his abs. The girl immediately ordered herself to return from heaven to earth, because it was impossible. She modestly told the imperial servants that she would accept their invitation. After some time, the maid had already finished preparing the young lady for the meeting with the emperor, beautifully braiding her hair. At the end, the servant said that everything was ready. The heroine, looking in the mirror, saw herself in a beautiful blue dress and with a braided hair, decorated with flowers. The girl blushed and covered her mouth in admiration, after which she told the princess that she was beautiful. One of the subordinates told the little girl that it was time for her to go. But then the beautiful lady turned her attention to Blake, who was staring at her. Not understanding why he was staring so intently, the girl asked him if this image suited her or not. He immediately came to his senses and blushed, after which he told his wife that she was very beautiful and looked simply charming in that dress. The girl smiled, took her beloved by the hands, and said that in that case they could set off on their journey. Meanwhile, the emperor was already waiting for his guests in a beautiful greenhouse, sipping black tea and deep in thought about something. But he didn't have to wait long because Princess Ansia was already rushing towards him. Coming closer to the master, the young lady greeted the great light of the empire. The man asked her to sit down with him at the table, then said that her outfit suited her very well. She first thanked him with a smile for the compliment, and then for the gifts he sent them. The little girl admits that of all the gifts she liked the magnificent golden ball the most. Tenstheon became interested and suddenly asked the guest if she liked gold. The heroine wondered why the king suddenly asked about gold and not about the ball, but said that it was because the prince could use it. He remained silent for a few minutes, but then asked the young lady in a stern voice if she was worried about the crown prince. The child replied that this was in the order of things since he was her husband. The emperor, elegantly raising his cup to his lips, asked how she could like a boy like Blake. But the girl said that she would like to ask him about this, namely, whether there are people who hate him. Tenstheon's gaze immediately dimmed and became very frightening. He said that many in society despised his damned son. Ansia's words astonished the gentleman. She said that they were being misled by false rumors and that she was sure that he also liked the crown prince. The man thoughtfully put the cup on the table, expressing surprise that the princess does not observe etiquette. He says that the prince is the heir to the curse. The little girl smiled and said that Blake was his son first and foremost. His Majesty folded his hands seriously on the table and asked the girl why she was so sure that he liked this child. The crown princess replied that if he did not like his son and daughter-in-law, he would not have sent gifts. Tenstheon said that it was simply gratitude to them for the deal with Marquis Hummel. The little girl decided to ask him if he had forgiven her for yesterday's misdeed. The gentleman suddenly asked if something like that had happened. Ansia laughed and said that she was confused, so she didn't remember much about what had happened. The ruler also smiled and said that it was brave of her. Then he ordered the servants to bring refreshments. A few minutes later, a bunch of different desserts appeared on the table, from cakes and pastries to sweets and cookies. The main character was so happy about this that she blushed, but did not forget to thank His Majesty for such treats. After trying a piece of strawberry cake, the young lady couldn't help but exclaim out loud that it was incredibly delicious. This also consoled the gentleman. Unexpectedly, the protagonist quietly put her fork down on the table and said that His Majesty the Crown Prince would also like this dessert. The Emperor was silent for a moment, but then said that he would then send these dishes to Crown Prince Blake's palace as well. Joy and happiness returned to the girl again, and she sincerely thanked the king. Continuing with their modest tea drinking, Tenstheon told his guests that he had heard that she had extensive knowledge of Eastern culture. Antia thought that, as she had assumed, he had found out everything about her in advance, because it would be strange if he had not been interested in her until now. The lady replied that she did not know much about it, but that she was interested in their culture. But the man stated that it was not so easy to find information about it. The lady thought that if she said that she had seen publications on this topic in the Count's library, other people would believe her. But the Emperor would find it strange. How a 10-year-old girl could be so smart. She stood up from her seat and approached the gentleman, saying that she would share a secret with him, covering her lips from prying eyes if there were any. The girl whispered in the man's ear that she actually knew many languages. He asked with interest if there really were many, to which the child said yes, and she knew all the languages of the world. The man was surprised by this and asked if it was true, to which the lady, calling him father, replied that it was. Tenstheon looked at the girl with confusion and asked what she had just said. The princess laughed and explained that since she was his daughter-in-law, he was like a father to her. A faint smile appeared on the emperor's face, and he admitted that it was true. The man said that she had a lot of difficulties because of the quick marriage, so he asked the lady not to be shy and to contact him if she needs anything. The guest agreed with him and promised that she would come to him often. On this bright note, the meeting of the protagonist with the emperor ended. After a few hours, Ansia was already at home, where she had already taken up the task she had planned to do today. She prepared many oriental dishes for her friends. Thick soup doenjangjjigae with soybean paste, onion and pumpkin, and fried roll of eggs and mushrooms. The faces of Eden, Melissa, and Blake showed admiration and fascination at such beauty. The crown princess, not even suspecting the fact that someone is watching her, asks her friends to try the dishes and tell her their opinions on the taste. First, the crown prince said the food was delicious, and then the guard called Angzia a culinary genius. The girl thanked them and suggested trying sunyun, a hot rice drink. All this time, the talented cook was being watched by Yunhan, who climbed onto the facade of the building and looked at everything through the window. A scarlet blush appeared on the boy's face, and he wondered what this strange feeling was that he got every time he watched the princess. No one must ever know about this young man who is the shadow of the emperor. Yunhan thought that if he hadn't been saved by Tenstheon when he was shot by an arrow and chased by warriors, he would have been dead by now. He, having become indebted to the king for his salvation, became his shadow and faithfully carried out his orders without a single failure. This devoted young man was very interested in songyun, a rice drink with a very pleasant and attractive smell. The boy thinks that he has already tasted all sorts of delicacies while following the emperor in the shadows, but he has never smelled such a delicious aroma. Deciding to try one spoon, he quietly approached the kamasot, thinking that this utensil was similar to the one his mother used. But suddenly he heard a sound behind him, which quickly made him realize that he was in trouble and needed to hide quickly. Soon, Anzia came to Sunyun as if nothing had happened, and was immediately attracted by one strange detail. She saw that the lid of her kamasot was lying on the side. The girl began to think about why this happened. Suddenly, something happened that she never expected. Next to her, she saw a black cat with purple eyes who was staring at her. The lady picked her up, calling her cutie, then jokingly asked the animal if he had opened her kamasot. The kitten's eyes sparkled and he meowed, which made the girl realize that he was very hungry. She decided to give the baby some milk. Suddenly, the cat stared at the fragrant rice drink, and the main character thought that he wanted to drink some songyun. The princess wondered whether cats drank it at all, but the animal continued to meow, as if hinting that it wanted it very much. Ansia, remembering that there was no cat food in this world, agreed with a smile to pour the furry guest some rice drink. She poured some sleepy liquor into a saucer and placed it on the floor so that the exhausted animal could hide its hunger. The princess, noticing how the cat drank with such pleasure, realized that he was very hungry. She says that if his master starved him, then he is bad. The girl hugged the kitten and said that if he didn't have an owner, then she would become one. Then Crown Prince Blake appeared nearby and asked Ansia what she was doing. The lady showed him a cat she had picked up on the street and asked if it was cute, to which he said it was better not to keep it that way. The girl objected that she was very calm in her arms, and apparently she liked her. But from the expression on the cat's face, it was clear that she understood what the mistress was talking about, and she didn't like it very much. But the crown prince suddenly calmly told his wife that she was holding not a cat in her hands, but a male cat. The animal immediately began to struggle out of the lady's hands when she asked if they could check now whether it was a male. The animal manages to carry out his plan, and he quickly lands on the ground and runs away. Ansia was very surprised by this, although she had thought before that the cat in her hands was cute and calm. She says that she would like to see him again. A few hours later, when the protagonist entered the emperor's office, he was very surprised and asked her what had happened. The lady laughed at him and reminded him that he had given her permission to come to him at any time. He said he just didn't expect her to come to him so soon after their last meeting. The man asked again what had happened. The girl, pouring the ruler a cup of sunyun, says that today she cooked in the new kamasat, so she brought him her prepared drink. Tenstheon, after taking one sip, said that it tasted strange, and the princess, who was alarmed by his reaction, asked if he did not like it. The lord replied that no, and she did very well. The girl said that in that case she would cook sunyun more often, to which the king agreed, and asked her to come to him more often. Returning home, Ansia immediately fell onto her bed, thinking about what a busy day she had had today. Gifts and tea with the emperor. She was also tired of cooking on the kamasode. But most of all, she was happy to meet the cat, who she remembered very well for his cuteness. Suddenly, Blake enters the young lady's room and she greets him as if nothing had happened. But for some reason, the boy silently sat down next to his wife and stared straight into her face. She even stood up in surprise and also looked into her husband's eyes in bewilderment. His Highness, without taking his eyes off the princess, simply said, "Meow," to her. The crown princess was stunned and seemed to have swallowed her tongue. She asked him again what he had said. He hugged his life partner and said that since she loved cats, he wanted to become one too. The young man looked at his wife with a pitiful look and asked if she needed another animal when she had him. Without letting go of his beloved, the boy promised that he would be anything for her. A rabbit, a cat, or a puppy, as long as she did not look for other animals. The girl called out to her husband in bewilderment, and he again responded sweetly, uttering only a single meow. The main character suddenly rushed into the prince's arms, exclaiming that he was such a cutie. Blake enjoyed the hug so much that his cheeks turned pink and he giggled happily. Meanwhile, a servant brings Lord Richard the report from the imperial palace that he requested. The young man has absolutely no idea what is going on there. Today, the king was given oriental food, and Tenstheon gave his daughter-in-law many dresses and precious stones. From the servant's report, the prince understood that the emperor was giving gifts to Ansia too often, and he had no idea what this girl could have done to interest the master so much. The only person Richard acknowledges is the ruler of the empire, and he has tried hard to get the king to notice him, but he hasn't been able to get even a sliver of his attention. But the heroine easily got the attention of not only Tenstheon, but also the monster crown prince. Richard does not understand what happened and why she changed so much. The boy angrily clenched his teeth and grabbed his head, thinking that if he had known that this would happen, he would have accepted the loving feelings of that child long ago. He considers the protagonist to be very heartless because he remembers that she stubbornly ran after him, but immediately changed after the wedding. But the prince decided that this was precisely why he did not want a retreat. The more difficult it was to obtain a thing, the more desirable it became, and he would make Ansia his own. Soon Richard came to his father's office as he had been summoned. He calmly asked what was the matter, but not a single word came from the man, whose brows were furrowed in a menacing manner. He only clenched his fist on the table angrily, looking at his son. But a moment later, the gentleman threw a candlestick towards the child, which flew past the young man's imperturbable face and smashed against the wall. Finally, the psycho asked the child with a shout if he was coping with his job at all. He informed him that the princess had visited the imperial palace today. The man is infuriated by the fact that the girl does nothing but visit the king's palace, and that she will even attend the imperial ball in honor of the sealing ceremony. The sealing ceremony is the most important holiday in the state, which appeared in honor of the return of the emperor after sealing the doors of darkness. Richard wondered what would happen if Tenstheon held the crown princess's hand, since there would be delegates from all over the world present. The boy suggests that in this case, everyone will think that the emperor is serious about the crown prince, and then Mr. Blake's position will be strengthened naturally. Finally, he asked his father what he should do, to which his father irritably replied that he could not decide anything. From the Hamel case to the press. When his father called him a real boy with the blood of a slave, the prince spoke angrily about how there was a way to change the situation. The man instantly calmed down and asked what this method was, to which the son replied that they simply needed to get the princess on their side. The gentleman thought well when Richard said that Ansia had always longed for her father's love, and if they talked to Count Balasian, he would play along with them. Still, a smile appeared on the sly man's face, and he said that they should try it. Mr. Balasian, having found himself in his daughter's palace and having slapped her, shouts that he came to her only because of her cold. The main character, wiping her cheek, which is hot from the blow, tearfully asks her father to forgive her. The little girl admits that she was wrong, but tells her father that she really does feel bad. Very bad. He did not listen to her and immediately began to scold the girl for being a disgrace to the family and for being born only because two families became related through money. Ansia, sitting on the floor, apologized to her father, but he said that he still shook when he remembered her mother. While the father was yelling at his daughter, ordering her to die quickly so as not to disgrace the Balasian family, the lady, wiping tears from her cheeks, did not stop asking for forgiveness. Suddenly, the protagonist wakes up, all in sweat and tears. Unfortunately or fortunately, everything that happened to her earlier was just a bad dream. Blake, noticing that his wife had suddenly woken up, asked excitedly if everything was all right and if she had had a nightmare. The princess thought that this was true and said so. The heroine knows that this is not just a dream, but her memories that happened to her before her rebirth. The prince, pitifully telling his wife that because he was nearby she had a terrible dream, did not even notice how the girl put her hand behind his head. The young master was very surprised when Ansia pressed him to her so that he lay right on top of her. She, closing her tearful eyes, said that she felt better when he lay like that with her. So she asked him to stay like that with her for a little while longer. When evening came, Mr. Balasian's servants laid a beautiful table for the master and his guests to dine deliciously. One guest says that the emperor has reserved the most famous aristocratic ateliers for the princess. He admits that his daughter is furious about this. Ansia's father agrees with his friend, smiling. The man says that he also heard that His Majesty bought a pink diamond for the girl, and Ansia's father also nodded, smiling sheepishly. Balasian wondered what kind of news he was hearing now. Until this moment, he knew nothing, and he had not written to Ansi since he sent her to the prince. He clenched his fist angrily and decided that the heroine would now be a great help to her family, although he had no idea how she had managed to get the king's attention. But then the butler approaches Count Balasian and informs him that His Highness the Duke is asking to meet with him. After some time, the door of the guest room where Arnold Cassile, Richard's father, was sitting, opened slightly. Arnold smiled at his friend and said that they hadn't seen each other for so long. He also greeted him, but thought that this man had ignored him for a long time. But when Tenstheon fell in love with his daughter Ansia, he suddenly appeared. The Duke complimented the gentleman on how well he looked, to which the Count replied that he was simply glad that the king was taking such good care of his child. Castle said that he treasured Ansia, and Balazian replied that it was only natural, since she always followed him, and would even die if he ordered her to. Richard's father, putting his cup of tea on the table, began to talk about how amazing it was to give a child such a rare education these days. He asked his friend if his second daughter was as stunning as her sister Ansia. The Count laughed heartily, after which he declared that his second daughter was not at all equal to the first, because Diana was his great pride. Suddenly, Arnold says something that shocks the man. He offers to give him his daughter Diana as a daughter-in-law, since she is so outstanding. Mr. Balazian pretended to be surprised, but he thought that if she became the daughter-in-law of Duke Castle, then perhaps in the future she would get the title of Empress, and he would become the father-in-law of the Emperor. However, the Duke immediately warned that this would require checking the quality of the education he gave his children. A greedy smile appeared on Ansia's dad's face, and he told his friend that he would provide him with the result as soon as possible. At this time, the main character, remembering her dream, grabbed her head and realized that reading a novel and experiencing it for yourself are completely different things. She looked at the inside of her palm and thought about how much Ansia had been through, and how much she had endured before she jumped into the water. The young lady closed her eyes tiredly and thought about the fact that, after all, her own father had driven her to this, and, albeit indirectly, he was a murderer. A maid enters the Crown Princess's room and informs her that Count Balazian has arrived to see her. The protagonist is confused at first and wonders what to do, but she still orders him to be brought to the guest room. Meanwhile, the girl's father cannot contain his anger at the fact that his daughter should have run out and joyfully greeted him, but did not do so. He glanced at his elegant watch and realized that he had been waiting for the meeting for 55 minutes. The man decided that he needed to take up her education again. But as soon as Balazian heard the door open, he immediately asked Ansia irritably what she had been doing all this time that she had crawled to say hello to him only now. But Mr. fell silent when he saw the princess, who no longer looked like her former self. A serious expression, lots of jewelry and self-confidence. The young lady asked her father sternly, without any of the joyful emotions that the Count had expected to see, what had brought him here. The Pope decided that she had become so bold because of the Emperor's attentions. He asked, stunned, if she was being too bold and had forgotten her manners. But then the maid Melissa stood up for the girl, politely asking the master to watch his words in the presence of the princess. He suddenly asked angrily how some subordinate dared to interfere in the conversation when Her Highness's father was speaking. Unexpectedly, the main character, with the same seriousness, asked her father not to address her servants in such a manner. The man asked her in confusion what she meant, and the protagonist added that if he was going to continue to commit atrocities, she would leave. Balazian, waving his hand at his daughter, angrily asked if she thought he would be more lenient towards her since she was now the crown princess. But his hand hung in the air when the girl calmly asked him if he had heard any news about the Marquis Hummel. The embittered father, unable to utter a single word, fell silent, only gritting his teeth in response. He lowered his trembling hand in horror because he remembered that the Marquis had swung at Ansia and lost his title because of it. The Mr. realized that his daughter had definitely changed. The silly girl who longed for love had disappeared. Now he saw before him only the wife of the crown prince, who had the highest position in society. Balazian smiled cowardly and told the young lady that he was just very worried and made a mistake, but asked why she was so callous to him. She suddenly ordered him to leave and not to show up near her palace again. The girl furiously told her father that this time she would let him go, but next time, if there was one, he would not be shown mercy. The guards quickly grabbed the man and took him out of the room, but he continued to ask his daughter to talk a little and let him go. The heroine silently watched him go, guessing that since the Emperor was showering her with gifts, her father had decided to intimidate and use her. Her gaze was full of rage. She considers the Count not a person, but trash, whom she now does not want to see at all. Even after everything that happened, Ansia's dad still sends her letters, but the princess has decided that she will not read this nonsense, and she doesn't have time for that, because she's busy with more important things. In the spacious, elegant hall, a calm orchestral composition plays. The girl is busy preparing for the celebration of the sealing ceremony, namely a dance rehearsal, but she is not doing very well right now. The crown princess barely had time to put her foot in the right place, thinking that etiquette was easy for her, but dancing was very difficult for her. but suddenly her foot accidentally slips, causing her to fall to the floor. Blake, the maid, the servant, and even the black cat immediately ran up to the victim. They all excitedly asked the heroine how she felt. She answered sheepishly that everything was fine, but thought that she was, of course, grateful to them, but would like them to allow her to be alone now. The young lady rose to her feet wearily. The maid she had been dancing with said that they would end the rehearsal here, to which Ansia agreed. Suddenly, the protagonist notices her little friend, a black cat with purple eyes. She crouched down next to him and held out her hands, beckoning him to her. The girl took the little animal in her arms and hugged him, squealing because he came to her today. She then asked the cat if he had seen her fall. He only meowed, but thought that she just needed to place her right foot correctly. The heroine said that perhaps dancing was not her thing and asked if she could do it, but the cat continued to meow, trying to tell her that she just needed to place her foot correctly. The crown princess smiled and told her furry friend that since he had cheered her up, she would treat him to some sunny-un. Soon the cat was guzzling the rice drink, but the owner asked him to drink it more slowly. Then Blake came to the heroine, wiping sweat from his face with a towel. The lady asked if he had studied fencing with Eden, to which he said yes. But suddenly the prince's gaze focused on the animal, and he asked his wife why it was still there. She smiled shyly and asked her husband why he treated cats this way, and asked him to give this cat some love and affection too. The boy bent down to the cat and thought hard about something, after which he said that it didn't look like an animal. The princess asked what he meant, and the gentleman, reaching out his hand to the animal, said that he felt something strange. Suddenly, the cat jumps out of its owner's arms and runs away at the speed of a bullet. Ansia was very surprised by this, jerked towards her furry friend and called out to him. But at that very moment, Blake took his wife by the hands and asked her not to look for him anymore, then asked why she continued to pay attention to other males. The girl smiled shyly and said that it was just a cat, but the prince said that he was not happy with it, and that he, as a male, should be enough. The heir asked her if she liked rabbits, to which she replied that she did not. And then the gentleman, sweetly lowering his eyelids and clenching his fists, asked if she liked cats, after which he meowed. The protagonist instantly blushed and thought that her husband had eaten so much that he had become such a cutie. The lady declared that she liked everything about her husband, and the crown prince laughed happily. Then the girl remembered something and asked Blake if he could fulfill her request, to which he immediately agreed without hesitation. The princess blushed and asked him why he agreed so easily, since she could ask him for something strange. He said smilingly that it didn't matter to him, because he could fulfill any wish of his wife. The main character took the heir by the hands and asked him to help her practice dancing with her. The girl told His Majesty that she wanted to dance her first dance with him. Blake swallowed his tongue for a second, a slight look of confusion on his face. The young prince smiled and told his wife that he would certainly help her. The girl said that she had made no progress, but the boy said that was not true. The lady became embarrassed and said that she could step on his foot, but he replied that he didn't care, and it wouldn't hurt him, since she was a fairy. The heroine asked him sheepishly if he considered her a fairy, to which he replied that he did. Ansia laughed at this, but then took her husband's hands and invited him to start rehearsing. But suddenly she saw that her partner's face had turned very red, so she asked him if he was embarrassed, to which he excitedly said no. The girl smiled silently and began to perform the dance, which they did very beautifully and mesmerizingly. But suddenly the princess stepped on her partner's foot and at the same moment sheepishly apologized. But immediately after that, the madam hit Blake painfully on the head, causing him to scream. The lady was very embarrassed and told His Highness that she still didn't know how to dance, but he only laughed and said that it was only her first time. The little girl asked him why he was doing so well, and the prince replied that he was just watching her. He told his wife that she could do it too. Soon, the couple resumed rehearsing the dance, and they did it so well that it was difficult to notice the lady's unprofessionalism. Blake and Ansia prepared for the ballroom dance all day until the sun went down and the stars and moon appeared in the sky. The protagonist, leaning tiredly against the balcony railing, tells her husband that she barely managed to dance with him once, and all thanks to him. The young gentleman told the girl that she shouldn't put so much pressure on herself, because His Majesty would dance much better than him, so she shouldn't worry. The lady asked him if he really thought so, and he replied that he did, adding that everyone would admire her, so that no one would even notice how she danced. The princess blushed and laughed sweetly. She was pleased with the support of a loved one. The crown prince said that she would be the most beautiful at that ball, and all the guests would simply fall in love with her. But suddenly the boy's gaze faded and he wanted to say that he also wanted to go to the party. But halfway through, he fell silent, upset. The main character held her breath in surprise and stared at her husband. She didn't dare say anything, but she thought that she would like to see him there too. Ansia, placing her hand on His Highness's palm, said that when he grew up, he too would be able to attend the ball. The young man resolutely answered yes and promised that then he would definitely accompany her. The crown princess smiled and said that she would be looking forward to it. After some time, the heroine, having put some aromatic soup on the emperor's table, cheerfully asked him what he thought she had cooked today. The man looked at the dish with disdain, frowning, and told the girl that she was very brave to decide to kill the ruler of the lands before his very eyes. The crown princess laughed at this joke and convinced her father-in-law that she was not going to poison him. He scooped up some soup with a spoon and said that everyone who brings him food says the same. Tenstheon tried the dish, and when the young lady asked him how it tasted, he said it was good. Ansia was so happy that she cried tears of happiness. She remembers that the gentleman liked the bibimbap last time. The girl is happy that there is a person in this world who also likes spicy food. The little girl said that she was glad about this because she was worried that he wouldn't like it. But he consoled her, saying that she was worried in vain and that he would even eat poison from her. The emperor elegantly wiped his lips with a napkin, and the princess said that he could not take poison as he would become ill and Blake would be very sad. The man thought deeply about something and told his daughter-in-law that she always does something for him, and he is glad that she does not hate him. Mrs. Balazian tells the king that he is the light of their empire, and for the sake of the crown prince and his people, he must think of his health first. The heroine immediately set up an interrogation regime and sternly informed Tenstheon that Sir Colin had told her that he had not slept all night. He asked her to stop grumbling and start eating. The gentleman admitted that he also wanted to give her a gift, but the lady said that she did not need anything. Then the emperor, with a grave expression, declared that he would build a glass greenhouse for her in the palace of Amoria. The palace of the crown prince, where the main character lives, looks old and abandoned. Its name is Amoria, which means love. But there was not a single greenhouse around this castle, so it was impossible to see flowers in winter. His Majesty thought his idea was very good, so he decided that he would fill in the lake next to the palace and build a greenhouse there. The protagonist remembers that he is talking about the very lake into which Ansia fell before her wedding. The girl confessed to His Majesty that if it was because of her, then he should not do it, because she made a mistake then, as she did not know the area well. The young lady promises that this will never happen again, but the gentleman answered in the negative. He frowned and declared that he could not allow his daughter-in-law to be near that terrible place. Ansia smiled sheepishly and thought that the lake was no parent's enemy, but she didn't understand why Tenstheon was so serious now. Sometime later, Ansia, dining at the same table with her husband, tells him that the lake will soon be filled in and a greenhouse will be built there. The prince is very happy about this. The little girl asked him if it was okay for it to disappear, to which he replied that she had fallen into it, and it would only be better if it were gone. Balazian decided to ask if he really didn't feel sorry, and Blake, with frightening determination, replied that it would be fine if they buried him right now. The princess was embarrassed because she thought that at such moments her husband resembled the emperor. She could not understand what had upset them so much about that lake. The boy said that it would be great if instead of all the lakes in the world there were greenhouses, then suggested cabbage as something to plant. The main character said that it was a vegetable from the east, and then she would be able to make kimchi, which is her favorite dish. Antia admitted that he probably wouldn't like it because it was a bit spicy, but Blake happily decided he could eat it. The girl grabbed her friend by the cheeks and said that he still needed to grow a little, but in that area he had definitely gained a little weight. His Highness was overcome with a feeling of shame and became embarrassed by this, but the young lady laughed and said that he was a real cutie. The crown princess asked her husband if he had any wishes for the plantings, to which he immediately replied that they were roses. The lady asked him if he really wanted to plant roses, and he replied that he did. He wanted to plant them for her. The main character thought about the fact that a red rosebud means love, and this flower is given when proposing. She clenched her fist in alarm and wondered if she could even accept this flower from Blake. The next morning, the sleepy protagonist rose from her bed. The girl is in no hurry to get up. She is thinking about the fact that the day of the ball has finally arrived. Here the prince wakes up on the bed next to the princess and, rubbing his eyes sleepily, in a hoarse voice asks his wife if she is leaving. Ansia smiled tenderly and told her husband that yes, and she would already be getting ready for the holiday. To the girl's surprise, His Highness was very happy for her and wished her good luck. The heroine thought that her husband always smiles, although she is the only one who receives gifts from the emperor, studies etiquette, and only she will attend the ball, as if his happiness lies in her being happy. Blake smiled sincerely and wished his wife a good time at the celebration. After some time, the young princess was already being prepared for the holiday. The servants put a lovely pink hairpin on her silky, golden hair. The lady's hands were also put in order. The girl was given a neat manicure, her skin was powdered, and her ring finger was decorated with a ring with a red stone. As a result, the maids dressed Ansia in a magnificent, delicate image, consisting of an airy pink dress, jewelry, and accessories. The main character smiled and thanked her subordinates for helping her get ready for the ball, because they had worked hard since the morning. The girls blushed and said that it was an honor for them to serve her, that she was very beautiful, and that she would definitely be the main hero of today's celebration. A few minutes later, the smartly dressed girl was descending the stairs to the first floor in order to quickly get into the carriage and leave. But suddenly, Emperor Tenstheon, who had been waiting for her below all this time, notices her. As the lady came closer to him, the man complimented her, saying that she looked great. The girl said that he was gorgeous too. He declared that she was flattering him, but Ansia immediately objected that this was not so, then admitted that she had some strange feeling, but asked the gentleman to wait a little while she understood what it was. A moment later, the princess said that her father was simply perfect, which even made Tenstheon's eyes widen. Still, the ruler laughed and told the girl that she was still flattering him. His long-fingered hand reached out to the protagonist, and he invited her to follow him to the carriage. The princess's small palm touched the emperor's hand and squeezed it pleasantly. Mrs. Balazian agreed with Tenstheon, calling him father. His Majesty and his daughter-in-law hurried to the carriage. Soon, the emperor and the main character arrived at the celebration, where the butler majestically introduced them to the guests. The ballgoers bowed their heads to greet His Majesty, the great light of their empire, and Her Highness, the wife of the Crown Prince. But suddenly, among the guests, Ansia notices Richard, who also bows to them smilingly. The girl's mood immediately worsened when she saw him, because she had to meet him even after her recent refusal. However, looking at the majestic king, she thought that in any case, the main characters should be like this. But the next moment, she decided that even if they weren't like that, then let them be cuties like Blake. Tenstheon, noticing that his daughter-in-law was thinking about something, asked if everything was okay. He leaned towards the girl to better hear what she wanted to tell him. The little girl whispered that he looked really cool. The man laughed modestly and told the young lady that she was flattering him again. At this time, the guests' faces showed obvious surprise that His Majesty leaned towards the girl and even smiled at her. The main character was stunned by this. She did not understand why those present were so surprised by Tenstheon's usual smile. The princess looked at her father in surprise and wondered what image he had then. The girl noticed that when the smile on the gentleman's face disappeared, the atmosphere in the hall changed. She realized that this was the king's influence on the rich. The ruler suggested that they begin their evening quickly, so he began to deliver his opening speech. The protagonist, sitting and waiting, thought that when he finished his speech, he would ask her to dance, and then the ball would really begin. The lady clutched the fabric of her dress in excitement as she wanted to have her first dance with Blake, but was afraid of appearing capricious if she asked for it. When the emperor finished reading his speech, he told the guests that he had intended to dance with his daughter-in-law today, but would not do so because of his terrible skills. It was hard not to notice the bewilderment of those present. But Tenstheon wished everyone to once again give glory to the goddess of light and enjoy the evening. As His Majesty sat back down on the throne, the bewildered girl turned to him. He smiled and asked if she wanted to have her first dance with Blake. The princess blushed and replied that she wanted to. As it turned out, Tenstheon understood her feelings. The man added that he would wait for a second chance to dance with her, for which Ansia sincerely thanked him. The king's hand touched the girl's forehead, and the ruler told his daughter-in-law that he was very grateful to her. She was surprised at how warm her father's touch was. The two ladies who were watching them were very surprised when the emperor stroked the girl's head, and could not believe their ears when he called her beautiful daughter-in-law. Ansia was very confused by this. She thought about what kind of image her father-in-law had, that guests were surprised by such trifles. The girl's foot came down the steps when the ruler said that even if she did not dance, she should have a good time at her first ball. One man, who introduced himself to the heroine as Marcus Sheldrin, told her that she was truly a wonderful blessing to their empire. The little girl replied that she was pleased to meet him, then admitted that she had heard that his son had graduated from the Knight Academy, and congratulated him on it. She then turned to Countess Marcion, who had recently acquired a precious fifth grandson. Ansia said that he was blessed by the goddess of light. The protagonist has another thing that worries her no less than the etiquette at the ball. to remember all the aristocrats, which is what she did before the ball. Identifying the rich list was a basic skill for the empress or the crown prince's servant, and today Ansia greeted everyone without any problem. Suddenly, behind her, the young lady notices Count Balasian, her father, who looks at her so angrily as if she were not his daughter at all. Immediately after this, the irritated man turned around and walked away, holding in his hand some little girl who looked like the protagonist. The main character guessed that this lady next to him was none other than her sister Diana. Antia looked sadly at the floor and wondered if her sister was okay and healthy. Suddenly, another acquaintance, Richard, approached her and greeted her cheerfully. The crown princess also greeted him, but her expression clearly showed that she was tired of this boy and did not want to communicate with him. But the prince told the lady that she now looked even more beautiful, after which he extended his hand to her and invited her to dance her first dance with him. Ansia frowned in confusion and smiled at the same time. She wondered what had happened to this little guy that he was seriously proposing this to her. The girl realizes that the princess's first dance partner must be the prince, and the others, given their status, only say hello. But this gentleman immediately and proudly offers her to dance. The lady crossed her arms in displeasure, shook her head, and replied that she was very sorry, but she had to refuse him. But Richard doesn't think of backing down. He smiles and tells the lady that she doesn't need to be shy if she can't dance, because he will lead the dance well. The heroine flared up with anger, because he essentially believes that if the emperor did not dance with her, then her skills are at rock bottom. But then the girl declared that she would not dance if his skills were not as good as His Majesty's. One of the ladies who stood nearby laughed and told the princess that there were no people who could dance better than Mr. Tenstheon. Another lady said mockingly that if she was looking for a dance partner on par with the emperor, she would not find anyone, because the king was the best at it. Richard clenched his fist in displeasure, and the protagonist thought that his pride must have been hurt, but even so, she showed a little politeness. The embittered young man turned around and left, and the young crown princess turned away as if nothing had happened. After some time, the main character went out to the balcony to get some fresh air. She thinks about Blake, because it was the first time they had been separated for so long. She realized that she misses her rabbit husband. The baby thinks that he is crying now because he misses her. Suddenly, 3 timid knocks were heard at the entrance to the balcony, after which someone's small hand appeared between the curtains that covered the entrance. The unexpected guest asked Ansia if he could come in. The lady thought it was a girl's voice. The curtains on the terrace were drawn, meaning she was busy, but the girl was probably very tired and had nowhere to go. The heroine allowed the stranger to come in, after which a blonde with blue eyes looked out from behind the curtains and greeted her older sister. Antia immediately recognized her relative, with whom she had recently broken old ties. This is the main character of the novel, Diana. The count's daughter told her sister that she looked very beautiful today, like an angel. She added that she was not just beautiful, but graceful. The lady was so enchanted by the princess that she did not understand how she could be so beautiful. The protagonist reflected on the fact that she was glad that her sister was being raised well. Diana loved Ansia very much. At first, Ansia loved Diana too, but her father constantly interfered, and this separated them. Whenever Diana said she wanted to do something with her sister, the count would beat his eldest daughter. As the beatings continued, Ansia kept her distance from Diana, and she could no longer ask her sister to play with her. Later, she will think that she is guilty of her sister's death and will burn with guilt for the rest of her life. The main character of the novel will leave home when she grows up. And to atone for her sins, she will become Blake's servant. The protagonist thinks that, unlike the original, she is not dead. Of course, the real Ansia is gone, but her sister does not know about it. The crown princess realized one good thing. Diana would not suffer from guilt for the rest of her days. The count's daughter smiled and told her sister that she looked cool when she greeted everyone at the ball. Then she asked if she was okay, since she had fallen into the lake. His Highness's wife smiled and replied that she was okay. Suddenly, Diana, as if remembering something, turned away from her relative and took something out of her pocket. The girl handed her friend a beautiful jewelry box and told her to take it. When Ansia asked what it was, the little girl said it was a fire monostone that maintained heat. If you hold it in your hands, it will become warmer. The count's daughter, embarrassedly scratching the top of her head and smiling, admitted that she wanted to give it to her earlier. But winter was already over. She replied that everything was fine and she was already feeling better. Diana decided to warn her not to worry about her father, since she had bought the stone secretly. The blue-eyed blonde squeezed the stone in her sister's hand tighter and said that she really wanted her gift to be accepted. The main character was delighted and thanked her relative, saying that she would definitely use it. Suddenly, tears appeared in Diana's eyes. When the heroine asked why she was crying, she answered that she was just glad that her gift was accepted. Ansia handed her exquisite handkerchief to her sister and asked her to wipe away her tears. But Diana, taking out her handkerchief, refused, saying that she could use her own, and her handkerchief was very beautiful, and she would be sorry to dirty it. The girl asked the princess if the emperor had given her this scarf, to which she replied that he had. Then the count's daughter said that his highness must like her, which made her very happy. The protagonist, noticing how sincerely her friend smiled at her, thought that she turned out to be much prettier and sweeter than in the novel. Soon the carriage of the crown princess arrived at her native palace. The girl was happy that she had finally arrived home. But as soon as the young lady got out of the carriage, Blake immediately rushed into her arms. The lady blushed and grinned. She told her husband that she had already returned. Then she asked His Highness how he would evaluate her elegant appearance and behavior at the ball. The heir smiled happily and said that she was incredibly beautiful. The girl was so comforted by his answer that she did not hide her great joy. Sometime later, when the married couple was already going to bed, the boy asked Ansia if she had fun today. She said that she had, but she was nervous. The young man then asked his wife if she had danced with the emperor, but the girl suddenly replied that she had not danced at all. His Highness jumped up from his seat and excitedly asked why this had happened. But the heroine calmly said that she wanted to have her first dance with him. Ansia happily said that the emperor understood her wish and showed respect. Blake clutched the fabric of the blanket in his hand in alarm and asked why she had not danced with Tenstheon, since he himself could not go to such a place. When the lady asked why, Tenstheon replied that he was cursed. The protagonist gently placed her hand on her husband's hand and repeated to him what she had already said many times. He would definitely be cured. Ansia thinks that today she met the one who will remove the curse from her husband, and she is really very beautiful and sweet. The princess kindly raised the boy's hand and squeezed it, asking His Highness to promise her something. She smiled and asked him to dance with her when the moment came for him to lift the curse from himself. He, without calming his anxiety, agreed, after which he asked in bewilderment who else he would dance with except her. But suddenly he confessed to the girl that he was scared. She tried to calm him down, saying that his curse would be lifted. However, Blake, with tears streaming from his eyes, said that he was not sad because of this, but because she would leave him and one day suddenly abandon him. The heroine calmly said that she would not go anywhere, but the young man shuddered and excitedly asked his wife not to leave him. His Highness shouted to Ansi that for him there was only her, and he would do whatever she wanted, just so that she would not leave him. The princess anxiously rushed into Blake's arms, asking him to stop crying. He, unable to hold back the tears that were pouring from his eyes more and more, asked his wife to promise that she would never leave him. At that moment, Ansia thought that all she had to say was that she would stay with him forever, but she couldn't lie like she usually did. Still, she hugged the desperate guy and calmly said that she would not leave him. A few hours later, the heroine thinks that she promised Blake that she would not leave, but at the same time she believes that she needs to prepare for goodbye. She thinks this because the prince must fall in love with Diana, just like in the original story, and then his curse will be lifted. Looking at the sleeping, tearful boy, the lady thinks that she wanted to help her husband recover from the shock of her suicide attempt. She wanted to protect him. While typing a letter with a quill, she reasons that if Richard, as in the original, wanted to make Diana his own, she would have hindered him by preventing their meetings. The girl sighed tiredly because she really planned this. But now this plan is not destined to come true, because Blake likes her more than he thinks. After signing the letter, which turned out to be an invitation to visit Diana, Ansia decided that it was time for her husband and sister to meet. A few days later, while with Blake in the corridor that leads to the street, the heroine tells her husband that her younger sister will arrive today. He sternly, frowning and straightening his shoulders like a soldier, told his wife that he understood her. The princess thought she heard him telling Hans about his new clothes, which turned out to be an elegant white suit with blue elements. She asked the young man if he was worried, and he said that he was a little worried, and only because his daughter-in-law would suddenly hate him. The lady straightened his collar, asking him not to worry. She realized that he was worried not about meeting his love, but about meeting his wife's relative. Ansia thought that maybe she was getting ahead of herself, but it was better that they met earlier than in the original, than it would be too late. Soon the married couple went out into the garden, where the carriage of the count's daughter had already arrived to greet the guest as expected. Diana, oddly enough, immediately rushed to hug her sister as soon as she got out of the carriage. The girl says that she was very happy when she learned that she wanted to see her and sent an invitation to her palace. The Earl's daughter, hugging her sister and shaking her like a puppy, said that she looked great today and was getting better every day. She shyly asked her to say hello to Blake first. The little girl obeyed Ansi and, bowing politely, greeted him. The boy also smiled and said that he was glad to meet her. The young lady then thanked His Highness for inviting her to visit. At that moment, a certain romantic spark arose between them. A gentle smile appeared on the face of the main character who was watching them, and she thought that, as she had expected, they looked harmonious together. The princess told her friend that she would go away for a moment to greet His Majesty, and asked her to wait there, to which she agreed. The girl turned to her husband and asked if he could show the palace to Diana at that time, and he happily said yes, and let her leave it to him. When the young lady had figured out what her friends would do during her absence, she finally left. Even though Ansia knows she did everything she could, namely bringing Blake and Diana together, she still doesn't feel very good. The main character, reading in her quiet library, wondered what those two were doing now. Prince Blake is the heir to the curse, and Princess Diana is the heir to the power of light that can lift the curse. The lady wondered if they were attracted to each other. The girl believes that despite the fact that she and Diana are sisters, there is no problem with this. She understands that even if she and the prince had a marriage of convenience, it can be annulled at any time without prior notice to the church. In this world, it is not uncommon for a marriage to be passed on to a brother or sister if it breaks up. This is possible because creating bonds between families is more important than people's love feelings. Ansia clenched her fist in alarm and thought that regardless of the customs of this country, Blake would still have to divorce her for another girl. The princess grinned maliciously and frowned because, as she thought, it was annoying, although her husband even sang to her. He liked her so much. But the next moment, the heroine grabbed her head and asked herself to stop, because she now looked like a capricious 10-year-old. The little girl understands that the crown prince needs to become closer to Diana, because it will be better for him. Staring at the page in the book about magic, the lady wondered if her sister was really the only one who could lift the curse, and why she couldn't. Sometime later, walking down the corridor with books in her hands, the protagonist reflects on how much closer her husband and Diana have already become. But suddenly she comes to a half-open door from which the voices of His Highness and her sister can be heard, as if they are arguing about something. The princess immediately rushed into the room where she actually saw her husband and Diana arguing. She asked excitedly and perplexedly what had happened. Although the boy noticed his wife suddenly appearing in the room, he continued to argue with the guest, saying that she was very much mistaken. The count's daughter, who blushed with anger, persistently asked the gentleman not to be so stubborn. Ansia, not understanding what had already happened in these 2 hours, asked the children to calm down and take turns telling what had happened. Diana said that she loved her sister more than anyone else, but Blake said that was not true, and that he loved her more. The girl said that she was actually related to her, and the boy said that they were actually married. When Ansia realized that they were arguing over her, she was overcome with shame. She had no idea how it happened that the main characters of the novella were arguing like that. Diana told her rival that she had liked her sister since she was 8 years old, but Blake angrily stated that it didn't matter because he loved her more than anyone in the world. The protagonist smiled and sighed. The lady thought that, if she thought about it, they had become quite good friends. A couple of hours passed and the kitchen began to fill with a very appetizing aroma. It turns out that a Korean dish is being cooked on the stove. A stew in which vegetables, tofu cheese, mushrooms, and meat are stewed. This deliciousness is prepared by Ansia. The girl brought a spoonful of the dish to her lips and tried it. She liked the taste. Suddenly, Blake appears behind the main character, hugging his wife from behind, and asks her if she is still preparing twenjanjjigae today. The girl smiled and said that she remembered how much he liked this dish from the first spoon. The boy confessed that her twenjanjjigae was the best food in the world. The lady reminded her husband that he needed to have lunch and go to fencing lessons. Time flew by quickly, and the married couple had already arrived in the garden with Diana and one maid to begin fencing training. Blake decided to continue the old song and irritably told his wife's sister that no one in the world loved Ansia more than him. But the count's daughter again replied that this was not so, and that she loved her more because they had blood ties. The grown-up protagonist, smiling as she watches her friends argue, thinks that 2 years have passed, but nothing has changed. The young gentleman objected that they were, after all, a married couple, but the girl stuck her tongue out at him and said that they had never even kissed. His Highness instantly turned as red as a tomato, not saying a word out of shame. The crown princess laughed at her husband and thought that he looked like he was about to cry. The main character hugged her sister to lighten the mood and asked the children to stop arguing and start training. Then the girl, adjusting Blake's collar, said affectionately that it was time for him to start studying too. He agreed with her, tenderly calling her his wife, which angered Diana again. Suddenly, she rushed to the side and decided to play a game with His Highness, where the one who runs to the training site first wins, after which she immediately announced that the competition had begun. The prince asked her angrily why she had started so abruptly and said that it was not fair. The boy ran after Diana, asking her to stop and start again, but she jokingly said that he was just having a delayed reaction. The crown princess, who had been watching them all this time, was surprised that they were competing without stopping. The maid Melissa smiled and told her mistress that the two were getting along well today. These words made Ansia think. She also thought that Blake, who looked like a little rabbit, and Diana, who looked like a little beagle, would be good friends. The maid thought that this was true, after which she admitted that she was glad that His Highness had such a good friend. A strong wind blew, which blew the girl's hair. The main character thought that, as Melissa said, they looked like friends, but nothing more. The young lady suddenly thought that she felt relief. The girl admits that she decided to be honest about her feelings. She does not want to go anywhere. She wants to stay with her rabbit husband, who always smiles at her and rejoices at her successes. Ansia also wants to stay close to Mr. Tenstein, who has become a father figure to her. And finally, the princess wants to be near her cute little sister, who looks like a beagle. The little girl understands that time spent with loved ones is very valuable, but she cannot be so greedy. Even though she has it all now until Blake's curse is lifted, her happiness could shatter into a million pieces. But the girl decided that until her husband became an adult, she needed to find a way out. Otherwise, she would have to give up and leave them. Antia said that she believed that she would definitely free His Highness from the curse so as not to lose him. After this, the young lady told Melissa that they needed to go to the Emperor and the Crown Prince, to which she agreed, and they went. Having met Tenstheon, the protagonist told him everything. His son's curse can be lifted, and the heir of the Balasian family is capable of this. Therefore, they simply need to fall in love with each other. The gentleman listened attentively to his daughter-in-law, but it seemed he did not believe her words. Later, Ansia tried to explain to her husband that if an heiress to the power of light appeared, he would have to marry her. But he refused. The girl's eyes bulged out of her head, and she reminded her husband that in order to remove his curse, he would have to do this. But the boy, calmly touching the princess's hand, said that as long as he could be near her, he did not care about any curse. The lady was surprised by this, but he added that the main thing for him was that she was nearby, and that was enough for him. Blake was adamant from then on. He thought only of his wife and not of solving his problem. That's how 2 years passed in the life of the main character. During this time, many changes took place in the Crown Prince's palace. The lake was filled in, and a greenhouse was erected in its place. They also made a training ground and a small field where, as Blake wanted, Chinese cabbage began to be grown. The Crown Prince's palace finally had servants, and they were all very good and loyal people. The protagonist, looking from the balcony at her field of Chinese cabbage, thinks about what a good harvest they had this year. Also this year, the Crown Princess, as a girl with a high position in the state, was in charge of all imperial affairs. Originally, this was supposed to be done by the Empress, but Tenstheon had no intention of marrying again. He gave his daughter-in-law the Cephia Palace and also allocated a room for an office on the 3rd floor of the Imperial Palace. Everyone envied his boundless love for his daughter-in-law, but in fact, on the 3rd floor of Tenstheon Castle, there was more than just an office. A place was created there for secret research, which was carried out in order to find a way to remove Blake's curse. It was filled with history books in ancient languages and books about light magic curses. Richard will spread the rumor that in the ancient dark magic of the goddess, there is a trick that can transfer evil spells to another person. And Tenstheon, deceived by him, for the sake of his son, will want to take the curse for himself. But in the end, he will be killed. Coming to her secret office and opening the mysterious book, the lady remembers that 1,000 years ago there was a country called Jelkan, but it was destroyed by Philip. And in its place, the Asteric Empire was founded. And the ancient language used in Jelkan was lost under unknown circumstances. And even the clergy could not decipher it properly. The heroine remembers that in the original story, Richard uses this to deceive the emperor, so she must prevent this. The girl understands that Duke Casil and Richard are currently keeping a low profile, but when the time comes, they will definitely use this trick. She should keep her main weapon because as soon as the latter finds out that she can read any language, he will begin to act differently. Because of this, Ansia hides her knowledge, and as luck would have it, At the same time, a secret room was created in the depths of the imperial palace in order to save Blake. The girl turned around to look at something and thought that, nevertheless, there was no safer place than the palace of Filion, where the emperor lived. The young lady looked at the large lithographic print, which no one could find in the original, but was found when the lake was filled in to build a greenhouse. She ran her fingers over the scratched letters, which were difficult to make out. Je, Ina, Chest versus Preven. Below, the girl believes that there is an important clue written on this stone, but due to severe wear, it is not clear what is written. The young lady was calmly examining the ancient artifact when suddenly the door to her secret room opened slightly. The protagonist was seriously scared, trembled, and turned towards the sound, wondering who it could be. In the half-lit room, the silhouette of an adult man with beautiful white hair and wearing a luxurious suit appeared. As soon as Ansia was able to find out who this unexpected guest was, she instantly stopped being afraid and smiled happily. It turned out to be Tenstheon, who also smiled at her affectionately. The girl joyfully called out to him, calling him father. The crown princess laughed merrily and said to the gentleman that he looked very well today. The compliment brought a smile to the man's face, but he replied that she was flattering him again. She declared that she was not lying, and as proof she cited the fact that he was the first love of all the ladies of society. But the emperor asked who had told her this fiction, and the lady replied that everyone said so. While the king was modestly adjusting his hair, the girl thought that at first glance he seemed formidable, but in fact he was just shy. A sly, smug smile stretched across Ansia's face, because she could draw such a conclusion because she had known her father for many years. The gentleman asked his daughter-in-law if she had looked at the print, and she replied that she had, then asked if he had come to look at it too. Tenstheon admitted that he had come to see her and asked why she had not come to see him. The girl said that she thought he had an important guest. The lord calmly closed his eyes and replied that he had no one more important than her. The little girl smiled because she understood that now he was sincere and spoke like a real father. The emperor says that the curse must be lifted, of course, but she also needs to rest. She asks him not to worry and says that she sometimes rests. Then the gentleman said that he knew that she never rested, and the lady confessed that she was so busy because she enjoyed doing this work. The princess said that he needed to rest because he shouldn't overwork himself like that. She was so lost in her conversation that she didn't notice the man's hand above her head. Tenstheon stroked the girl's head and smiled, asking her to stop grumbling. Antia instantly pouted because he took her concern for grumbling, but still agreed with him. At this time, interesting things are happening in the newly built training ground. Blake uses all the strength he has to fight off the enemy's attack with his wooden sword. It turns out he's training in sword fighting with Diana, who's also trying to hit as hard as she can. At one point, the girl suddenly turns out to be more resilient than the young gentleman and makes a jump towards him, causing him to push back. But the crown prince does not miss the opportunity to strike with his sword and swings at his opponent, but not as hard as expected. Eventually, the pair collapses on the green grass, gasping for air. Diana and Blake are incredibly tired from training. The girl, still catching her breath, asked the young man why he wasn't giving it his all, and if it was because she was a girl. He, sweat pouring down his face, replied that it was because she was Ansia's sister, and he did not want to harm her. In response, the little girl admitted that she also did not swing the sword too much, because he is the husband of her beloved sister, and she also does not want to hurt him. The children spent a few moments in silence, after which the prince decided to ask his friend why she decided to become a knight in the first place. She, looking thoughtfully at her hand, which she raised to the sky, answered that she wanted to become strong. The boy was slightly surprised by her words, and he asked why she needed to become stronger. Diana, frowning angrily and resolutely clenching her raised hand into a fist, said that it was because she wanted to protect her beloved Ansia. Blake admitted that he is glad that his wife has such a wonderful younger sister. The girl added that now, unfortunately, she can't do anything for her, but in the future she will be able to protect her. Suddenly, the young gentleman said something unexpected. He asked Diana to take care of Ansia if he died. The count's daughter was so outraged by this that she immediately jumped up and asked her friend what he was saying. She angrily asked him not to say any nonsense if he did not want to make her sister unhappy and leave her to live out her last days as a widow. The lady added that, as Blake knew, Ansia loved him very much, and it was very impolite to speak so easily of her death. The girl asked angrily if he had any idea how sad she would be. The young master excitedly reminded her that he had one problem, namely a curse. She, blushing with rage, declared that it would be removed and that he should not speak of it again. She promised that she would never forgive him for these words. Diana asked her friend to work harder from now on to protect Ansia together, and he, with a thoughtful tilt of his head, agreed. The Count's daughter, majestically raising her wooden sword upward, exclaimed that she was a knight, and this was her knightly promise. Blake raised his weapon as well, and then said decisively that he too was making his promise. When evening came, Ansia, going to bed with her husband, thought that his sentence had not changed in 2 years. She doesn't know if it's because of her early acquaintance with Diana or because she wants to lift the curse instead of her. But in any case, the girl is happy about it. The heroine told her beloved that he must be tired, so she wished him good night. The lady wanted to gently stroke her husband's head, but he suddenly opened his eyes. She asked if she had woken him up and then apologized, but he said no and that everything was fine. The young man hugged the princess's hand, smiled, and said that she was very warm and that he didn't have bad dreams with Ansia. The girl asked him if he had had a nightmare, and he replied that he had. And then the lady asked what it was. The prince said that he forgot that dream as soon as he woke up, but he knows for sure that it was creepy and sad, but everything is fine with him, because his beloved wife is nearby. The heroine patted the boy on the shoulder and thought that he looked sleepy, and since he had training tomorrow, it would be better for him to sleep. She laid the young boy down on the bed and again wished him sweet dreams, calling him her child. But Blake was so infuriated by this that he suddenly sat up from his bed and declared that he was not a child at all. She shook her head in bewilderment and said that to her he still looked like a cute child. The crown prince's face at that moment looked as if his whole soul had fallen into his heels. He asked Ansia excitedly. Observing this reaction from her husband, the protagonist understands that this is, of course, not what any man in the world wants to hear. She, again calling the young gentleman her little husband, asked him to go to bed, but he again capriciously exclaimed that he was not a child at all. Ansia had a smirk on her face that said she enjoyed teasing her husband like this. She called him baby again, knowing he didn't like it, but she didn't want to spoil him too much. However, noticing the dejected state of His Highness, she thought that perhaps she had overdone it a little. Another sunny day has arrived, and Blake, looking at the growth marks of Ansia, Diana, and himself scratched into the tree, sighs heavily. The young man is upset that he is shorter than everyone else. He leans tiredly against a tree and wonders when he will grow up. Then the crown princess appeared behind him and cheerfully invited him to the palace to eat. But the young gentleman shook his head sadly and replied that he had no appetite. The girl asked in surprise why, when he said that no matter what he ate, he still wouldn't grow. Ansia reminded him that he needed to eat more to grow. He said, offended, that he was doing just that, but was not growing, and the young lady encouraged him, assuring him that he would definitely grow up later. The heroine thought that he must still be worried about yesterday's words. She remembers that in the original, his height was not described. The protagonist recalls that Richard was 185 centimeters tall, and Blake was said to be slightly shorter than him, so he would be about 170. She gently took her husband by the hands and said that she had cooked the dishes again today, then asked if he still wouldn't eat. Blake's eyes immediately sparkled like 2 diamonds, and he asked her again in admiration. The boy said that in that case he would certainly join the meal, after which the couple went to the dining room. Ansia thought what a cutie her husband was. It's evening and Diana is at home practicing swordsmanship, which she does very well. She stopped, stared at the sword, and thought that her movements were still not so smooth. And Eden, the trainer, advised her to work on her left hand. Still, the girl got back into a fighting position to repeat everything again. But she doesn't manage to do this because there is a scary man behind her, of whom the little girl is so frightened that she shudders. It turned out to be her father. He irritably asked his daughter what she was doing. She quickly hid the wooden sword behind her back and, as if nothing had happened, replied that nothing. Mr. Balasian grabbed the child by the hand and began to shout that no matter how much he taught her, she still didn't care. And now she had even picked up a sword, which would leave her hands calloused. Father clenched his jaw in anger at the mere thought that Ansia had ignored him and made him a laughingstock among the aristocrats. The man recalls the Marquise's words about the need for his child to have an excellent education. Balasian understands that if Diana marries the Duke of Cassel, all his shame will be washed away. He let go of the girl's hand and calmly said that if she listened to him, she would be an excellent lady. The man's face darkened instantly. He ordered his daughter to tell him everything that happened in the Crown Prince's palace today, and to take the recording ball there. Fear completely consumed Diana and showed in her frozen eyes. She, shaking all over, asked what he was saying. Meanwhile, at the Crown Prince's palace, Blake was very surprised by the dishes his wife had filled the table with. Among them were fragrant bread, rice, and bean soup. Grabbing the strange little sprout with his chopsticks, the young man asked Ansia what it was. He was disgusted by this sprout because it looked like a monster. The lady guessed that he meant those one-eyed creatures that lived in the Valley of Chaos. The little girl explained that the soup was made from soybean sprouts that she had grown herself. She added that the emperor had found them in the eastern state of Chang. The young lady explained that the round beans grew in such long shoots, and if he ate them, he would grow very tall. The prince mentally prepares himself before trying the plant. He is encouraged only by the fact that it will make him taller. Only when he closed his eyes was he able to stuff the bean sprout into his mouth and chew it. When Ansia asked how it tasted, His Highness replied that in the end it tasted like hair. Very tickling on the tongue, not sweet and not salty. The girl said that was its charm. While Blake was eating beans, the protagonist thought that he was eating well and didn't even spit anything out, which made her very happy. Mrs. Balasian chuckled and asked her husband to taste the soup too. He took her advice and, touching his lips to a spoonful of soup, was ready to feel a very disgusting taste. But surprisingly, he liked the dish very much. The young cook asked him if he really liked it so much, to which he happily said yes. Antia explained to the happy boy that soybean sprouts contain many nutrients, so he should not just drink the soup, but eat it all. Meanwhile, Diana, walking along the dark corridor of her house, cannot find a place for herself, because something is bothering her very much. She walked on boldly, thinking that she could not do what her father had ordered her to do. Night fell very quickly in the kingdom. A bright round moon rose above Count Balasian's palace. The count, looking at the magic recording ball that his daughter had returned to him, asked why she had brought it back to him. She calmly replied that she did it because it turned out to be broken. The man asked menacingly if there was any suspicious movement in the crown prince's palace, and the girl replied that there was not. He then asked if Blake's curse had spread further on his skin, and the little girl modestly admitted that she didn't know. Suddenly, the father jumped up from his chair and shouted to his daughter that a marriage had been announced today between the Duke's eldest son and the Marquis of Weston's daughter. He furiously asked the child what she had been doing all this time. Balasian tells the poor girl that she is not as beautiful and smart as Ansia, and she is also not capable enough to be the center of attention of the aristocrats. The man asked if it was really so difficult for her to listen to her dad at least once, but the girl continued to look at him fearfully and remain silent. Suddenly, the father noticed a wooden knight's sword lying nearby. He grabbed the weapon angrily and asked Diana how much longer he was going to hang around here and why she hadn't thrown it away yet. The girl rushed to take the ball from her dad, asking him to return it to her, because for her it was a precious thing that her older sister had given her. The count grabbed the young lady by the hand and ordered her to look at her hands, asking how a high-ranking girl could have a hand covered in calluses. He angrily asked who would marry such a bride who couldn't even take care of her own hands. Diana realizes that he is saying this because he is worried about her, and also because he is angry that this will reduce her value in the wedding market. But then the count hears something that surprises him in no small way. His daughter says that she is not going to get married and wants to become a knight. The young lady decided that she was not an accessory for her father who had to look good, so she boldly told him that she wanted to become a knight, and next year she wanted to enter the Knight Academy. He asked her what nonsense she was talking about wanting to become a knight girl. He thought it was the dream of a lower-class nobleman or a commoner. The little girl clenched her fist angrily and said that this was just a biased opinion, and Countess Shannon, the third commander of the knights, was also a woman. Count Balasian shook his head mockingly and said that the countess was just an old maid. But the girl said that she would still become an imperial knight and protect her sister. She asked her father not to force her to do anything strange anymore. Suddenly, a loud slap was heard, and Diana's cheek turned red from the blow. The little girl called out to her father in bewilderment and quietly,